So we're now in public session, and just remind members that this meeting is broadcast online and throughout Parliament buildings, and we welcome anyone who is watching online at the minute. Please have your mobiles muted, and no recording or photography in the meeting is allowed. So if you're content, we'll move through the agenda. So firstly, just want to record apologies for Sinead McLaughlin. Is anybody aware of any other apologies? No? Okay, thank you. Okay, any declarations of interest? No. Okay, members, under Chairperson's business, I'm going to refer you in the first instance to page 6 of the pack, the Members' Code of Conduct. Page 55 of the pack for the letter of complaint from PSNI, the Commissioner for Older People in Northern Ireland, and page 3 of the table pack for a letter from Age NI. And I do want to read into the records extracts of the letter of complaint from the Commissioner's office. So members will have received this, and you will be aware that it relates to an evidence session in which Kelly Turtle of Age NI was subjected to a personal attack on the basis of her views on transgender rights. Evelyn Howe, who's the Chief Executive, said, "I was very offended by the use of Mr Gaston's time with witnesses and was particularly aggrieved that in the session about equality matters, Mr Gaston chose to launch such a disrespectful attack." It goes on to say, "Mr Gaston is a human being with the right to free speech and to hold discriminatory views he truly feels. However, I would wish to remind the whole committee that witnesses are in a position of less power and privilege than committee members. We are your guests, and as such, all members of the committee should be especially considerate of the risk of offence or discourtesy. This was a deliberate and calculated abuse of that power differential." She does say that she commends all other members of the committee for their support, but nevertheless the principal issue of equality rights for older people is not, and has not been in the past week, the main focus of public attention. Rather, the rudeness and bias of Mr Gaston is being circulated on social and print media, and she wanted this to be taken as a complaint. So members, I have asked the clerk to include that code of conduct in your pack, and I do want to refer members to Principle 10, where members should show respect and consideration for others at all times. Rule 15, that you shall not subject anyone to unreasonable or excessive personal attack. But I do want to raise and bring your attention, members, to the fact that I have the power to intervene if a line of questioning by a member is inappropriate, and I have the power to suspend a meeting if a member persists when the chair has directed them to stop or is disrupting the business of the committee. And also, I want to draw your attention to Rule 13 of the Code of Conduct, and it applies that you shall not act in any way which improperly interferes or is intended or is likely to properly interfere with the performance by the Assembly of its functions or the performance of a member, officer or staff of the Assembly of their duties, staff officer. So I just want to seek your agreement that we write to HNI to apologise formally for the incidents at last week's meeting, that we also respond to the letter of complaint from the Commissioner for Older People's office, and that just to remind you all of the Code of Conduct, and that any inappropriate questioning in the future will be not tolerated. We have important work to do on this committee to support victims and survivors, those people who are marginalised, who are discriminated against, and I will not, as chair of this committee, allow the conduct of certain individuals to detract from our very important work. Does anyone have anything to say?
All great.
Chair, would it not be more fitting that we refer this, and I'm happy to propose to the Commissioner for Standards, and on the basis of their findings, not the soapbox of in here, that then we respond to both complaints that have been raised?
Go ahead, Carol.
I want to declare an interest. Maybe a couple of us can do it. Myself, Connie, Brian and Harry are all on the Committee for Standards and Privileges. But the issue is there needs to be a complaint, Timothy, made by someone for it to go. So
go ahead.
I just, if the clerk can clarify if a committee can refer that, or would it have to be done by an individual?
It's my understanding that the committee can't, but an individual MLA or an individual member of the public can.
yeah.
Okay.
On that basis, could we respond accordingly and advise that that's the appropriate mechanism, and I'm happy to fully engage with them?
Well, they've just clarified that that isn't the appropriate, and it would have to come from an individual. Now, I am going to move on, but I take great exception from the use of the word soapbox. And it just shows that you have learnt nothing from the past week, from the outrage at your comments and from some of the chastisement you've received in the chamber because of your behaviour there too. So please reflect on this complaint and the disruption it has caused to this committee. I'm going to move on. Okay, members, draft minutes. You'll find them in your pack, page 58 to 60. Are members content?
Agreed.
Okay, so in terms, I'll go ahead and sign them, but there is a matter arising. So I'm going to ask the clerk to give us an update on the invitation to the religious orders and other institutions in terms of their payments to the HIA redress. Thank you, members. Go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah, so we've invited the institutions to two of our meetings, and some have declined, some haven't responded, and others, and one has agreed to come. So members agreed last week that we would have start the process for compelling. So with your agreement today, the committee will write to each of those institutions stating specifically sections 44 and 45 and the powers under which the committee, the Assembly operates. We'll invite them for the 4th of December, which is 2 months from now, but ask them to reply within a month. If they do not reply within a month, or if they say they're not coming, then we will seek legal advice the following week, and then we'll start the process of writing to the Speaker for formal compelling of these witnesses.
Okay, everybody content? Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, members, we're going to move on to our first oral briefing session. So if they can be brought in. So members, you'll find the clerk's brief on page 67 of your pack. You'll find the draft programme for government on page 67, and you'll also find the strategic framework for ending violence against women and girls on page 157 of your pack. So we'll just give a minute then for the ministers to join us.
All this paper.
I know, it's going to be a busy meeting
Well, my
today.
tablet's broke, so
Of all the weeks.
of all the weeks.
Right out there, I thought they were all coming here, but there's some for next
Oh,
week.
that's okay.
So
Okay.
they're trying to do something.
Just give a wee minute to let everybody come in and settle down.
They're very high.
They give all the new stuff today.
Yeah.
So I'm on one of the earlier rollout. I was just telling you the program on that rollout too. You get a laptop for a member as well. And then you get a different
Okay, I'm just getting a couple of windows opened, just to let a bit of fresh air in. But thank you so much, First Minister, Deputy First Minister, and our two junior ministers for coming to committee today. Just would like to remind members that we only have the First Minister and Deputy First Minister and Junior Minister for 1 hour, so we can keep our questions nice and succinct. We'll cover a lot of ground. Okay, so do you want to make any opening remarks?
Yes, thank you, Chair,
Thank you.
and grateful for the opportunity to be back in front of the committee this afternoon, and I know you'd like us to keep our comments brief, so we'll endeavour to do that and open it up then for discussion. We're obviously delighted to have both junior ministers with us today, also both Pam and Aisling, who work very hard alongside us in the Executive Office. And I know that throughout the course of the conversation, I know members will want to touch on some of the departmental issues which we are currently working on and considering. But I suppose it would be remiss of us not to highlight just some of the issues that we have put a lot of emphasis on, and some of the significant announcements that we've made in recent weeks. Firstly, which the committee are heavily involved in, which is around the Executive's draft programme for government, announced to the Assembly and launched for public consultation. I think it's fair to say it's been welcomed by everyone, and it's a culmination of extensive dialogue across the Executive. Inevitably, of course, and you will know this, that there are different views on what should or shouldn't be included in the programme for government, and we look forward to considering all the responses that we receive to the consultation. We know that this, as I said, this committee has a pivotal role in terms of coordinating that collective response of all the Assembly committees to the programme, and no doubt will perform this task diligently, and we look forward to the Assembly's contribution to our final programme for government in a short period of time. And this is, of course, followed our earlier statement to the Assembly of our legislative programme for 2024, and departments are now taking forward the work on these bills, and as indicated, we're going to make a further statement later this term on the legislative proposals for the remainder of the 24-25 Assembly session, and we'll keep coming back at it and refreshing as we add to it.
Yeah, thank you. And it's great to be here as well. I just want to echo the First Minister's thanks for the opportunity to appear before the committee. I want to just mention, and again, just keeping our remarks very brief, but I just wanted to mention in particular our strategy for ending violence against women and girls, which has been released and published since we were last here. A key programme for government priority in the draft, but we felt it was important to move ahead when it was able to. And it's an issue that the First Minister and I are personally committed to, so we're very pleased to see us reaching that milestone. We were delighted, therefore, to be able to formally publish a strategic framework and the first delivery plan associated with the strategy. We are confident that it will deliver real change for those who suffer harm and abuse across our society every day. We are realistic about it, but we do believe that this is a really strong start, and it will progress to make a real tangible benefit and difference. A few weeks ago, the First Minister and I were also in the North West with the signing of the 290 million Londonderry and Strabane Region City deal. There's a hugely significant opportunity for growth in the area and tangible proof of how collaborative working across government can deliver much needed investment on the ground. Of course, all of this is set amidst the financial constraints that we all face. We're all fully aware of the two city deals that are currently paused, and we're doing everything that we can to push those issues and try to ensure that the government unpauses that. We don't see that there's any justification, and all parts of Northern Ireland must benefit from those. But it is an example of the financial constraints and challenges that we do face, and I know that everyone on the committee is well aware of those as well. I just want to assure the committee that our focus very much is on delivery. Yes, it is challenging at the moment because of the current budget, but we are very aware that we can do something. And that's why we've moved forward with a whole range of issues, and you've seen those set out in the draft programme for government priorities. We're also very conscious that one of the big things that we can do is to prepare for the opportunities hopefully coming in relation to some of those priorities, that we are finding the right solutions to be implemented in the right way, at the right time, in the right place. And I know I mentioned that at the very first appearance that we had with the committee, the importance of getting those right and well developed proposals and interventions and in the delivery of those in an effective way. So there is a window of opportunity now for us to try to do that and to find that, and I think that is the best way of making that meaningful difference that we want to across those priorities that we've identified. Thank you.
Thank you. Either of the junior ministers?
We just thought for brevity to allow
Okay,
you to
no,
come in.
even better. Thank you. Okay, that's good. I want to focus today. Obviously, we've got two more panels, and we're focusing on what happened in the summer with the racially motivated incidents. And I just want to pick up on the Communities in Transition programme. So it's my understanding that you're in a transition year. You've had phases 1 and 2, and you're looking at planning for delivery of a future phase. Now, I'm concerned that of the 8, none of them are in South Belfast, and that's where we have seen the very prevalent coercive control structures of paramilitarism. And I'm just wondering where you are at in terms of phase 3, and if you're bringing forward that research so you can look at a new set of programmes.
Do you want us to start with that one, or do you want to ask a few?
Well, yeah, so that's the first one. The second one is pretty much linked to it, and it's really around the review of TBUC and where we're at with that. And obviously, instead of the binary, it would be more about the multiculturalism. And then I have a question in the end regarding our inquiry.
Yeah, okay.
So I can start in terms of CIT. You'll have had an update for the committee in terms of some of the progress that has been made in relation to the programme. Really good evaluations in terms of the implementation and the feedback on the particular projects. The projects were put together in terms of that collaborative design approach, and I think overall the evaluations have been very, very positive. You will be aware that the areas were decided in accordance with a matrix, and that matrix was based on a range of advice and evidence coming forward as to activity. South Belfast scored very low on that.
So that was 8 years ago. So I'm saying, is there going to be an update?
Yeah. So of course, the relevance of this type of programme is to continually assess that. So I think moving forward, of course, you have to make sure that these interventions are going in the right area. And that will be based on a combination of factors, including levels of criminality, but also in terms of intelligence and assessments around the levels of other activity. You will be aware that there is a crossover in terms of some of the activities in the summer too, where there's been interventions, particularly and including by the Executive Office. So, the South Belfast area is an urban village area, for example, and that was all about building social
Minister,
capital within the community. So these are very much so sorry, but I think it's important because it's important that these programmes are collaborative. So there is a complementary and supplementary aspect to both the urban village, neighbourhood renewal, community relations work, and the race and CIT work in all of the areas. So it'll be really important that we continue to learn from our experience of the rollout of those programmes in those areas to see where the added value, for example, of CIT would be. But that will be based absolutely on an evidence base of where the areas of need are for this particular type of project.
Are you giving an assurance there? Because your officials have said that this, looking forward to phase 3, this will involve commissioning of research to look at the prevalence of paramilitarism across CIT areas and beyond to inform. So I'm asking, has that research been commissioned for phase 3?
So actually, I'm not 100% sure, but we'll clarify that for you.
Okay.
But I just think a more general point is this: we live in a very changing society.
Yes.
And we have a number of different programmes, whether that be urban villages, whether that be good relations work, whether that be race relations work, whether that be the T-Buck work in general. And I think that we're moving to a space where we need to find a way to align all these things. And I think that no longer should our focus be on what would have been traditionally described as orange versus green. I think it needs to be on how do we make it better for society, a more equal society and a more inclusive society. So a lot of the work that we're doing in this regard is around that overarching review and how even all fits within that one umbrella. Okay. And we want to bring forward ideas that actually allow us to harness that work together. Do you want to add to that, Ashley?
Yeah, I suppose just in the last 8 months that we've been in position, and I know both Junior Minister Cameron and myself, it's something that we've been very present on in terms of T-Buck. We've met with a whole range of people, we've listened to people, and we have been able to see for ourselves just the impact that the T-Buck has really had on people's lives, bringing people together, and it's very much about it enhancing and investing in the communities. We've been to Derry, we've been to Newry, we've been all around Belfast. We've listened and spoke to people of all ages and backgrounds, and we have for them, that they have really been engaging in the programmes, and that has been really positive for us to see, because by and large what they're telling us is that they have really had to step out of their comfort zones, and that has been really powerful for us to be able to see for ourselves and listen to. As recently as last week, I actually was at the official launch of the Black Mountain Shared Space project, and that's a perfect example of bringing communities together, a space which is not only shared and welcoming, but it's modern and it's fitting for the people who will use it. And it's also about the community having a sense of ownership of that space too. I'm lucky enough, for me, it's 5 minutes away from my constituency office. So for me, that just shows the commitment that we have in terms of us as an executive to improving community relations, because fundamentally we all want everybody who lives here, who calls here home, regardless of your background, to be really proud of where they live, and somewhere that really represents them. And as Michelle has said, we understand that the makeup of society is changing, but listen, it's important for us as political leaders, as representatives, that we're out and about, that we're accessible, that we're listening, and fundamentally that we bring that back, because that will inform any review in terms of T-Buck and how we go forward in terms of that strategy.
Okay, well, I think you've covered my second question then. I'm wondering if we can get an update on the Identity and Languages Act in terms of 3 bodies. Is there an update on that?
Yeah, I think Pam was just going to confirm for you that actually the research has been commissioned.
Right,
so
okay.
just to give you that.
Thank you, Pam.
There you go, Junior Minister of the Rescue. Yes, so in terms
Well
of...
done, Pam.
In terms of the Language and Identity Commissioners, we are making progress. Actually, we've got panels now agreed and in place, so we can move forward to the next stage of the recruitment process. So I think that demonstrates good progress.
Okay, I have one last question, but I just don't want to hog this. So you'll be aware that our committee is conducting an inquiry into gaps in equality legislation, and it's, I think the direction of travel is nearly set out. We're only about halfway through taking oral evidence. So if a key recommendation is for this committee to bring forward a single equality bill, will we have the support of the Executive Office and your officials?
So I think there'll probably be a difference of emphasis in terms of 2 parties in terms of a single equality bill, but we haven't considered it. I certainly am supportive of a single equality bill, but I think we need to see the proposals coming forward so we can jointly consider them.
Yeah, so it'll be a case of taking a look at what the detail of it says. Like, there's undoubtedly a range of gaps that have emerged, and those need to be addressed. I think there's always been an issue about trying to bring those together and have a regurgitation of the existing law and asking people to vote again on that case, on that piece of legislation. So, you know, from my point of view, as Michelle has said, like, there will be different views on the single equality legislation. We haven't traditionally felt that that was the way forward with it, but absolutely in terms of the gaps of where there's gaps in equality legislation, that is something that we do want to look at and we want to move forward with.
Well, if there's a vehicle, not necessarily single, but if there's a vehicle or there's series of vehicles, then we will be able to.
That's something that absolutely we're committed to looking at and addressing.
Thank you, Deputy Chair. Thank you.
Thank you all for coming in today. It's really appreciated your time. I'm going to ask a few questions around the Ending Violence Against Women and Girls strategic framework. It was recently launched. It was obviously really positive, and the co-design partners have put in a lot of hard work along with your officials to get this over the line. I think I just wanted to ask a few questions around the funding. Specifically, I know budgets are very tight, but something that has been raised with me is if we look to the Republic of Ireland, they were spending 59 million, nearly £60 million just in 2024 on gender-based violence initiatives, whereas here we've announced £3 million, which is obviously positive, but it's £3 million over 2 years, which is much, much smaller. Could you give me some detail about how that's being spent? Are you looking at other funding streams or talking to the Finance Minister regarding that, and when the Change Fund will be launched?
So I suppose three questions in that, and I'll kick off. I think that obviously we're dealing with two different jurisdictions. We'll all have our political view of that. I know what mine is, but you're looking at a sovereign government in Dublin that have extreme, particularly in terms of the direct comparison to our budget versus what they are dealing with. So if you even look at the Apple tax issue, the entirety of the Apple tax is the entirety of our block grant for every public service. So therein lies the challenge that you can't really compare. However, £3 million is what we've identified for this first 2 years of the initial action plan, and we want to get that money out on the ground as quickly as possible, and hopefully before the end of the year we'll get the money moving. And there's a number of different strands to that work, and I think that that's certainly not the totality of it, because I know Emma and I are very determined that we use every avenue open to us to achieve additional funding. But what we wanted to do is take what we have for now, launch the 2-year action plan, align the funding to it, get that work moving, and then build on that. And I think there's lots of opportunities for us to build in going forward and looking towards whatever other funding stream there may be. For example, use the Irish Government's budget for an example. You know, can we in border counties do something around ending violence against women and girls and look towards shared island funding? Can we use whatever sources of funding that we have? We'll not be shy in trying to knock doors and get what we need, because this is a game changer piece of work. If we can have that whole society focus on ending violence against women and girls, I think that will be a game changer. We know it's not going to be turned around overnight, but it will start to transform. And I think if we're committed to it and continue to invest in it, then I think this 7-year roadmap can be successful and very transformative. And just to commend to the committee, the approach that we took in terms of the co-design was just second to none, and I think it's a very good example of how policies should be developed and going forward. They were in from the very start and had their hands in terms of the actual design of the strategy itself.
Yeah, and just to add to that, you know, we've expressed our thanks to all of those people who did give up their time to be part of that collaborative design process. I think there's lots of lessons to be learned across government on that process, and I think it was it definitely improved both, you know, in terms of looking at it from so many different angles, but also in terms of the actions coming out of it and the delivery plan. But Michelle is absolutely correct. Look, you know, £3 million is not going to fulfil the ambition that we have for the strategy. But we were very keen that we started, and we could start not just with the publication of the strategy, but with actually some funding to support initiatives on the ground. We're also very conscious that we didn't want to just replace funding that's funded elsewhere. And while there's been funded insecurity for really great organisations like Women's Aid, and that needs to be addressed, but we're very conscious that this is not, that funding isn't to be just pulled into the centre and then just replaced by this. The funding through that strategy has to be complementary and supplementary to existing funding within departments. And I think it's really important to make sure then that departments are bought into this as well. It's an exciting executive strategy, so the spend on these initiatives, for example in justice with the PSNI, through the courts, through communities, etc., is likely to be significantly larger, of course, than the 3 million that we have. But this 3 million will very much focus on working with grassroots organisations on the ground, and then funding to support, you know, that training and the improvements in terms of our structures and processes all around that prevention. So I think from our point of view, like, this is a good start. It isn't the ambition that we want for this, but we also are very realistic about the budget that we are operating in at the moment. But this will be a case of ramping this up and scaling this up over the course of the next number of years, and hopefully improving and increasing that pot of money available.
Just before you move on, just to remind members that we actually have a TO briefing on the strategy next week, so go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Paula. Again, I'll take the opportunity while the First Deputy First Minister's here. It's something that I really care about, and again, it is really positive to see this. And can I ask how you've been working with other departments already in regards to that? I know there's actions for Department of Education in regards to curriculum and educational programmes, and also, have you had any conversations with Department of Justice and Health about work you can do together on the recently announced domestic and sexual abuse strategy? Because there'll be a lot that aligns in the two.
Yeah, I mean, did you want to start?
Yeah, no, I was just going to say that, you know, like, I was really pleased actually the two strategies came to the executive together, so we had the opportunity to emphasise, yes, as I'm sure that the briefing that you have received, I think it is right and proper that there is a strategy there that goes beyond women and girls, because the domestic and sexual abuse strategy, of course, it impacts much wider than simply that. So it's right that it's there, and it's right that that work was developed as part of a cross-departmental project, and that's been published. But we wanted to absolutely make sure that this was not duplication, that these were complementary strategies with each other, because we did want this one to focus on the particular problem, and it is a particular problem of violence against women and girls and what motivates that and the issues with that. So we believe that the two strategies are highly complementary to each other, but we want to make sure in the operation of it and the implementation of it that actually does follow through. We've already been able to leverage some additional money, for example, through the Department of the Economy, through working through this strategy in terms of some of the projects. There will also be a number of actions that are low cost or no cost, and that can be about messages that are integrated, for example, within the curriculum in the Department of Education and elsewhere, where there, you know, it's the positive messages around the strategy, but also those key messages about what positive relationships look like as well. So there's many actions that actually we can continue to progress, even though the budget is comparatively small at the moment, but those actions will still make a big impact if done correctly.
And that work's actually already started, so the reason that we're able to arrive at the action plan and that everybody knows what's to be done in those first 2 years is because of that strong cross-departmental working. As Emma said, both strategies are going to really dovetail, separate but in some ways aligned. So I think that this is the best chance we've had actually to have a holistic approach to ending violence against women and girls and actually coming at it from every angle. And there's a part for everybody to play. But this is all about prevention. But probably what would be useful for the committee is that we've asked for twice a year updates in terms of the action plan itself and delivery points. I'm sure the committee would want to also have that information as well, and we can assure you that we can do that.
Thank you. Okay, Brian, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank the Ministers for their answers so far. The Executive Office oversees many significant issues, including the difficult issue of historical institutional abuse and clerical abuse. And I'm sure you would agree that it's important for victims to have confidence in all the processes and in everyone overseeing them. And too often in the past, people haven't spoken up when they've had concerns. I'm sure you'd agree that concerns about an alleged abuser shouldn't just disappear if they've been moved to another parish, either literally or metaphorically. So I feel it is relevant to ask the First Minister that you were present at the event in this building on the 14th of February 2023, which was also attended by the British Heart Foundation and was focused on the medical needs of a child. Were you aware at that time that Michael McGonigal was also present? And did you not feel that it would have been appropriate for you or someone else in Sinn Féin to have informed the British Heart Foundation that Mr McMonigal had been suspended from his employment with your party due to serious allegations prior to taking up his post with BHF?
I'd say two things. I'd say firstly, I'm absolutely aghast and horrified the two former employees decided to give a reference to this individual. It would not have happened had they have come and asked for permission. They would not have been given permission. So I don't agree. It was wrong, absolutely wrong, and should not have happened. Secondly, I make a more general point. No, I did not know anything about Michael McMonagle's whereabouts or employment. And I attended an event here in this building, like many of you would have attended the event, because of the support for the campaign. And I engaged with the family on that day, not with anybody who may have been with the British Heart Foundation. So I think it's important to actually have the ability to clarify that one point. Outside of that, I mean, we're here because of TEO, so I just wanted to give you that factual account of my view of it. But absolutely, this is not behaviour that's acceptable to me, and that was why, as soon as I became aware of it, we took immediate action, and the two people are no longer employed by Sinn Féin.
Yes, but again, the point is, given that members of Sinn Féin were aware of the allegations about Michael McGonigal, which he has since confessed to, McMonigal.
Yeah, you're saying someone else's name.
Does the First Minister stand over the comments made by the Economy Minister yesterday in relation to this issue, that there was no moral or public responsibility on Sinn Féin to have acted differently when they were aware of his presence at that event and employed by a charity?
I would say this. Look, remember at the end of all this, what Michael McMonigal has done is wrong. He's now admitted that, and he should be dealt with the full force of the law. Let's make that point very clear. Aligned to that, I'm very confident that I took all the correct action in terms of what I needed to do in terms of the disciplinary action within my own party, and he left our employment, and rightly so. In terms of your question in regard to the British Heart Foundation, I'm very confident that whenever we were aware of what we knew in terms of the fact there was a criminal investigation underway, that then became an issue for the police and justice system to deal with. And I was confident that that was the case. So there are, I think, lessons to be learned for a lot of people here in terms of due diligence of an employer who takes on an employee, for example. And I think everybody needs to learn those lessons. But in terms of my actions, in terms of the employment of these individuals and these references that were given, they would not have been okayed on my part. I never would have okayed those references, and had I been asked, I would have said so. And that is why the two people are no longer employed.
Well, as I say, I think the questions around what could have been passed on.
Sorry, can we move on?
Yes, could I raise two other matters?
No, I'm happy for you to move on to another question,
yes, yeah,
but I'm just saying I think the First Minister has...
If I, just to come in on that, issues around safeguarding of children are very relevant right across government, right across... I'm
not disputing that, I'm
and
saying
in terms
that
of,
yes.
and in terms of the work of the department, I just want to assure that, in terms of safeguarding of children is at the heart of many of those inquiries. But I think it's also important to say that, many of the key messages coming across is around that duty of candour, about communication, about making sure people are aware. Those are the key things that have come out of inquiries, and those are key things that we need to move forward and bring forward to make sure that children are protected and that vulnerable people are protected and all of that. So in a sense that we have overseen a lot of those inquiries. That overseeing of those inquiries themselves will only matter if the lessons are learnt from that, and indeed we're moving that forward in a situation, an atmosphere which is open, that has candour, and where people know what they need to know when they need to know it.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead, your next question. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I want to refer to the priority and programme for government for reform, transformation of public services. Can the Minister say more about the work of the Transformation Board and Delivery Unit? Many people will point to the need for greater efficiency and savings within government in Northern Ireland, and the number of public bodies and multiple boards that we have over some sectors. How can we ensure that where there is bringing together of bodies, that this will result in real savings to the public purse?
Well, that's what it's designed to do. I think it's important that we don't just look at the Transformation Unit in a singular way, because I think it's part of a wider policy approach in terms of creating that culture where we are innovative, where we have agility, which isn't traditionally how things have always been. So I think that the opportunity that we have here for a wider reform package, including what this division might look like, are quite significant. And we also know that they need to run alongside other areas. So in order for us to be able to have an efficient board, we need sufficient funding, which is the number one priority of the executive, which we continue to make that case. We also need to have this interim transformation board and the work which they are doing. We now have employed a new chief science and technology advisor, economic policy unit, fiscal council, people panel. We have a whole range of things that need to align for us to do things more efficiently. But certainly we think that there are opportunities for us to transform how we've always done things and actually get better outcomes ultimately, because that's what we're trying to achieve.
Yeah, this is a big piece of work. It's one of the 9 priorities, but it will be really important to all of the priorities, because we have to improve the way that we do business. We're very aware that at times there can be inefficiencies. There are things that we could absolutely do better, both in terms of policy development, but also the implementation and delivery. We only have to look, for example, at the capital programme and the frustrations at times in terms of big capital project rollout. You know, the longer that it takes, it costs more money. The delays cost more money. That is money that could be being spent elsewhere in terms of a more ambitious capital programme. So there's really good reasons why, of course, you would want to do things on time and on budget. And we fail to do that time and time again. So this is something that we have been very much for from the beginning, learning from other jurisdictions around a delivery unit and transformation approach. So it's both about getting in and looking at your processes and doing those better, but it's also about identifying new ways of doing things, new ideas, new interventions that are designed, measurable, very much focused on measurable progress against the targets that are set as well. So I think this could be a real game changer in terms of government. And we're proposing a delivery unit to be sitting within the centre, but as Michelle has outlined, with a whole range of other bodies, including the Transformation Board, including the work in terms of PSNI, and looking at the challenges and issues that there's been in the past. So that all comes together in a really ambitious programme of transformation and delivery, because at the heart of this, it has to be about delivery for this executive, despite the difficult budget, but we want to deliver. And I think people out there demand that we deliver, not just from the centre, but across government on the issues that really matter to them.
Okay. One final matter, Chair, just one of the priorities, the 9 priorities in the programme for government is to provide more social, affordable and sustainable housing. As all members and the ministers will be aware, the issue that keeps coming up in planning applications is NI water connections and getting approval for those. And so this is not just a matter for the Department for Infrastructure, it's very much cross-departmental. What priority is the Executive as a whole giving to ensuring that necessary investment to enable new developments to proceed?
I think it starts again with the point around we need the proper financial resource in which to invest and build homes and invest in our wastewater infrastructure. I mean, the announcement last year or earlier this year from the Economy Minister that he would only build 400 homes next year just wasn't going to cut it. I mean, it's not acceptable and it won't meet need. But we also have a wider target which we brought in previously around reaching 2,500 houses being built every year. We need to reach for that target and beyond that target. So we're committed to try and find additional funding that allows us to actually build more social and affordable housing. But you're right, alongside that, investment in our wastewater infrastructure is a must, or we'll not be building anything in the next 5 to 10 years because it's such in dire state because of decades of austerity, decades of underinvestment in our infrastructure, and that picture must be turned around. We're determined to try to work with all ministers across the executive, but even wider than that, we need the Treasury to actually assist. If we're going to be successful in transforming and doing these things and building homes and investing in our infrastructure, then we need a financial model that actually allows us to be able to do so.
So this is all being considered as part of the PSNI, the investment strategy for Northern Ireland, which will go up to 2050. That is at a very finalised stage. That's being currently considered by ministers. So that will deal with all of the big capital issues, but we're also very aware, as Michelle has outlined, about the budget constraints on that. But the key things that feature in that undoubtedly are affordable and social housing, for example. Yes, the Communities Minister could only announce 400, but that's because that's the capital settlement that he's had. We need to increase that. We need to give him the funding to be able to do that. Yes, water and sewage currently falls within John O'Dowd's department, but he can only do what he can do if he gets the capital budget to do that. Look, we know that there's going to be a shortfall, but we have identified as big priorities the water and sewage infrastructure, social and affordable housing, investment in our public transport system, and of course our education estate. We've seen the impact, for example, on special educational needs provision of not having the capital that is there to be able to have the facilities that people need. So we've identified those 4 big areas on the capital side. So those will feature very heavily in the investment strategy, but also we will have identified where the shortfall is, and we have given a commitment to look at how do we meet that shortfall, both by, of course, making the case for Northern Ireland to the Treasury, but also in terms of looking at ourselves and other alternative forms of funding as well, to make sure that we can do what we can in order to fulfil the potential that we have on the capital programme that will be outlined in that programme.
Okay, thank you. Harry, please, thanks.
Thank you, Chair. First Minister, Deputy First Minister, Junior Ministers, you're very welcome to the committee today, as are your staff. If I could just ask, now with the draft programme for government and with a limited time, of 2.5 years to run this mandate. What are your priorities going forward, and what will success look like?
Okay, so you're right, it is a shortened mandate. I think that's what makes the programme for government unique, because it's being something that we can deliver over 2.5 years, but also that we're going to keep refreshing and adding to it. So for me, success looks like hitting those areas and making advances in those areas that we have set out. And I'm really glad, because even at some of the things that we've identified in the programme for government, we're already delivering. The end and violence against women and girls strategy, the work around Lough Neagh last week, signing off on the first ever environmental improvement plan. I actually think that when I reflect on the first 8 months of this executive, I think that we've had a decent start in terms of the delivery that we've brought forward. However, we have an awful lot more to do. We know that. We just talked about some of those things, the major infrastructure investment that's required. But I think the collective working of the executive, the programme for government, demonstrates that I think there's a willingness perhaps that maybe I haven't witnessed before, that actually people want to work together and actually try to get delivery on those key areas like special educational needs, which we know is, you know, so challenging, alongside all the other public service, health service, everything else that we've set out.
Yeah, like absolutely. In terms of the executive, you know, I think right from the outset, you know, from our discussions with executive colleagues, you know, there's so much that we can agree on that needs to be moved forward. The big challenges that we face right throughout Northern Ireland are common across all communities, and I actually think our duty really is to have that very strong focus on the delivery. Should it be health, education, affordable and social housing? Should it be growing our economy? Those are things where there's a lot of commonality, and I actually think that we will work best when we focus on those things, because you're absolutely right, there's only 2.5 years left, and quite frankly, if we spent the entire of those 2.5 years focusing on those 9 priorities, we still wouldn't get done what we want to get done within them. So there's plenty of work to get on with. Obviously, the budget constraint is going to be the biggest risk in terms of delivery against that, but we're absolutely committed to making progress against all 9 of those priorities. How much progress will be partly dependent on how we work with the system in terms of the driving that forward, but also the budget that we're able to receive. Unfortunately, we are unlikely to get a multi-year budget in autumn, and we're unlikely to get that, I think, even for the next year. So that will hinder in terms of our ability to plan forward, but that won't stop us from making the preparations to grow, the preparations to scale up on all of those. I think the critical thing at the moment is we start what we can start, we roll out what we can roll out. As I said, like the absolute focus of this for us is about delivery. If we are not delivering against these things, then why are we here? We are only here to make that positive difference, and that's why we try to prioritise, as difficult as it is, because there are so many really worthy issues that you do want to focus your time on. But we're very conscious there's only so much bandwidth that is there. Let's focus on a smaller number of priorities, start the progress and make a tangible difference, and that's what we'll be working on the next 2.5 years. Yes, go ahead then.
Well, say welcome, progress made, and there is still more to do. Thinking of working families, childcare, etc. What else can the executive do that way?
I think in terms of childcare, really pleased that we were able to get out and make those initial announcements in terms of the interim package, but we're very conscious that that's not going to solve the issue of affordable childcare. It helps, and I think that is actually really appreciated by families. You know, there's now I think over 11,000 recipients of that subsidy support. And so really, really good that is something that is tangibly making a difference right now while the policy development is ongoing against the childcare strategy. But absolutely on those big things, the key thing will be getting the substantive strategy right as well. Hopefully, as the budget hopefully will improve, we will be in a position to be able to scale up even in those interim interventions over the course of the next number of years, but to be in the best possible position to be able then to roll out against an ambitious set of actions on those finalised strategies. And many of those are the same. You're absolutely right, for example, about housing. The Communities Minister can do more right now if he has the additional money, and our job and our task is to secure that additional capital money for him. But there's also more that he can do above and beyond that, with preparation, with development, with working with NI Water and Sewage, because those will remain barriers to an even more ambitious agenda. Those are things that we also need to get right in parallel, not sequentially, but in parallel to driving forward against all of those priorities. So we're conscious there's work to do now that is not just delivery on the ground. It is the preparation, it is the work, it is the development, but that needs to happen in parallel with the actions that people want to see.
Have a time for one on a different topic. Do you want
I'll maybe bring you back in.
fine, no problem.
I'm just conscious we've got 4 more to go. So
you.
Claire, please, thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Ministers. You'll not be surprised that I do remain disappointed that we don't have a priority in the programme for government in relation to older people. I think it's pertinent, maybe more than others, and I know others would maybe fight their corner as well. However, we are an ageing population, and our public services are going to look very different because of that demographic that's rapidly changing over the next 10 years. And I do think it's a failure to prepare if we don't include that in some form, even if it sets us up for the next mandate in terms of the actions that we need to take in relation to that. And I appreciate that both of you attended the recent event in the Long Gallery in relation to that and listened to some of people's views on that. So I'm mindful that we're in a draft programme for government stage, and is there any hope that we could include older people in that, notwithstanding that we've had disastrous decisions from the UK government in relation to older people, but we need to give value back to probably the most significant part of our population, and I don't think by leaving out of the programme for government we're doing that. So just your thoughts on that.
No, thanks for that, and we know that you're particularly interested in this area, and we were grateful to take up the opportunity to attend the Long Gallery and that event, and you can be assured that those present made sure their views were known to myself and the Deputy First Minister, and rightly so. But that's what the consultation's about. I mean, I think we do have to reflect some way the fact that we do have that ageing demographic, and that our society needs to reflect that, and our plans for government need to reflect that. So I think we definitely take all of that on board in terms of how we would shape the final document. What that looks like yet, I don't know. We'll consider everything in the round, but I do think it's a fair, legitimate point to raise. And we'll certainly look at it favourably, but we'll have to obviously talk about that as a collective executive. I know you're also keen to bring forward some legislation as well, which I think will also be significant in terms, and you've asked to engage us on that, and we're certainly up for that conversation as well, Claire. But
yeah, I think it's always difficult to make those choices, as you know, in terms of a draft programme for government to go out. And I think the calculation very much is around, do you have separate priorities, not just for older people, but for young people, for people with disabilities? Like, there are many, many key groups there, and we're very conscious that what we need to do is to deliver for everyone. And each of those particular groups have very particular issues within it. So we're very conscious of that. But we've made a decision, to go with 9 priorities that are all encompassing, because I think certainly from my point of view, it's important that all of those priorities mainstream all of those considerations for those groups. So if we're talking about social and affordable housing, that needs to take into account the needs of older people, and those needs at times are different from what they're going to be for younger people or young families, as we know, in terms of the structures, in terms of the accessibility, in terms of the needs of that. And that is common across most of the, like I say, even childcare and the childcare one, a lot of grandparents, as we know, that end up doing free childcare for grandchildren because it is simply unaffordable, and they're helping out and they're doing this huge amount of contributory caring roles that maybe they didn't anticipate doing. So I think actually it's maybe about us communicating that better and making sure that people know, should it be young people, people with disabilities, older people, rural, urban, that all of those things need to be mainstreamed within those key priorities. And if we need to reference that better, absolutely. It is only a draft programme for government, and I've no doubt that we will hear that very strongly. But we do want to send that very clear message that all of these priorities will be nuanced by reflecting on and making sure that we fully consider the needs of all of those groups across the Section 75 groups often referred to, but the needs of all across society.
I take that point, and we can't satisfy anything, particularly in a reduced mandate. However, I think it was the Chief Medical Officer of England and Wales, Chief Whitty, that said that you need to design your services around the demographic, and this programme for government is not doing that. And I do think that our services, which is what the business of government is to provide good public services, if you're not mindful of that, particularly in the area of health and social care, we're going to have a big problem in 10 years' time, and we're already seeing the consequences of that because we've failed to forward work plan. Another point I would just ask you to reflect on in relation to the programme for government, I'm hearing a lot of ministers say we don't need a programme for government to get on with the job of delivering, and that's fine. But the programme for government is not just there for executive ministers and government, it's there for the sectors, it's there for the statutory agencies. They align their priorities to the programme for government. So to say that the programme for government is just for us and we'll get on with it in other ways, I would just ask you to reflect on that, because I know that statutory agencies are disappointed in that type of language, because well, what do they do? And we can't exist without them. And if we've time for another one,
Did you want them to reflect?
Yes, if you want now, or come back to me.
No, I think I wouldn't use that language, so I agree with you. I mean, I think there are things that will sit normal departmental business that will carry on regardless if you had a programme for government, but that's a different statement to, well, that's just something we do, but we're doing this. So I agree with you. A programme for government has to mean something. It can't be a document that sits on the shelf. It has to be something that's actually a live document that demonstrates these are the things that we're collectively going to work on. So I take your point.
Okay, thank you.
Do you want a quick
It
one?
was in
Conscious
relation-
Brian, I didn't give Brian a third one, so
Okay, no, if you can
I'll
come
maybe come back at
okay,
the end,
yeah.
actually. Yeah, Carol, please.
So welcome to the committee. It's good to see you. So just in terms of the issue around, so there won't be a multi-annual budget this year, possibly next year. So there may be in the year that this mandate will dissolve. So I'm just thinking in terms of, would you, or is there a thought about running a programme for government right across? Different mandate. It's just that there's a lot of good stuff in it. There's obviously people concerned that things aren't in it that would like to see, but that's what the consultation's about. But certainly this needs to be the basis of not just this, but others going forward, because I just want to congratulate you. It took well over a decade for a programme for government to be agreed. So that would be my first question. Just curious. The second one is really just in terms of challenging, frankly, what has been a summer of hate in Belfast. Building up to murals, posters, then regrettably the destruction of people's homes, businesses and property, health and social care staff being intimidated out of their homes, children with disabilities and their families couldn't access homes because of sectarianism. And we have the awful ongoing issues in East Belfast where Gaelic games can't be played because of either threats, and children are intimidated of not going to school and being taught through the medium of Irish. What else can we do to challenge this? Because I just think, with your officials coming up behind, I'm sure they'll say everything and all the work that they're doing, and that's fine. And then with the police coming after. But just in terms of collectively, as an assembly and as an executive, what do we do to challenge this ongoing hate?
So to start with your first point, I think the programme for government, the draft, we'll get to the final version. Everybody recognises a short mandate, and we have to keep refreshing and updating it, because obviously we should get to the point where we have delivered some of those actions, and then we have to refresh. So I think there should be a continuity of a new mandate. There also are things that we know we won't get completed in this mandate, so there is a natural follow through. Also, the point about the budgets is important, because we know that for far too long we've been limping year to year, 100%. Year on year budgets, and that's no way to plan for anybody and for any public service. It's difficult for anybody to do that, even on a personal level. So I think that what we're unclear about is just where the Treasury are going to go. But I think early indications are that it'll be 2 years before we have that. We're in a multi-year cycle, but at least that we will. By the end of this mandate, we should be in a situation where we have a multi-year budget, which I think we should be able to align, even public sector pay to that, instead of public sector workers waiting year on year to get confirmation of where things stand. So I think there's huge opportunities for us if we can get to that juncture. In terms of the summer, horrific scenes in terms of the intimidation that we saw on our streets, and that's not in any of our name. No. None of us want to see that on our streets. We are an increasingly diverse society, and that's a very, very healthy thing, and something that we should be celebrating, and something that particularly political leaders should be waxing lyrical about. That's the kind of society that we want to see and to build. And where we see things that are wrong, then we need to call it out. So I think so too is the scourge of racism. It's the same for sectarianism, where it comes to young people learning Irish, playing Gaelic. That's not acceptable. There's so many children now being educated through the medium of Irish, and they need to see that in their community. And I think that particularly in East Belfast, I think you particularly referenced, That's just totally not acceptable. This is a thriving Irish language sector. People and parents want to make choices about where their children are educated, and we should be encouraging that and supporting that and calling out those people that are involved in basic criminality and intimidation of those people that are trying to advance good provision for people who want to take it up through the medium of Irish.
Just to add to what Michelle has said on the budget, I think a lot of people don't realise that we are dictated to some extent by what Treasury does in terms of a single year or multi-year budget. If there's no multi-year budget in Treasury, we can't do a multi-year budget.
Absolutely.
And that can be a frustration at times. There are assumptions that we can make in terms of planning, and we will do that. But of course, you're not going to make very, very optimistic presumptions and then end up having to not be able to do what you want to do or what you planned for. So there are assumptions. I think it is unfortunate in terms of the cycle that we have. But at the same time, as I said at the beginning, there are things that we can do and things that we can plan for in terms of looking forward. You know, we can't tie the hands of a new mandate, like that would be wrong to do. But I do feel, and I think on the feedback that we've got so far, that the 9 priorities are, you know, very much in the space of where the priorities of people are. They were put together by listening to people, by listening to the concerns of people about what matters to them. And we feel very confident that actually those 9 priorities do represent a lot of the concern that's out there. It's not the totality, absolutely not. But it is a prioritisation, and those are key priorities that have been emerging. So I would be surprised if the new executive coming in or the new mandate coming in 2.5 years wouldn't want to take forward that work and integrate that in Programme for Government. But we can't presume that at this point. On the wider issue, you know, look, hate is absolutely wrong. Should that be based on race or sectarianism? I think we should always remember that this is a very small minority of people who participate in this. I know that the vast majority of people across all communities throughout Northern Ireland stand united against any hate, against any racism or sectarianism, and against indeed the violence or disorder that might flow from that. So I do think that, look, we put this into perspective, but it's a big challenge that we need to tackle. You know, we took the decision in the summer to show very strong and united leadership across the executive to send that very, very strong message. You know, I've said this before, I say it again, look, we will always be there to listen to people, to listen to people's genuine concerns and issues. That is the role of politicians, that is the role of government. That is never an excuse, that's never a justification for any hate, for sectarianism, for violence, for disorder. And we need to be very clear as political leaders to have that clear difference in all of this, and to show leadership in the way forward. This is not the type of society that Northern Ireland wants to be, and I know that that is not across all communities. It is not something that is condoned or desired for their communities. But we're not complacent. We're very aware that there's things that we need to do, working with the PSNI and showing that support, but also in terms of, coming back to the very first question, working with the programmes that we have. This is what Together Building United Community is all about. This is what these interventions were all about, bringing people together, tackling myths, tackling prejudice, you know, creating those friendships and robust relationships across and between and within communities, no matter where they are. And that's very much what we'll be doing in terms of a review of TBUC, integrating the race actions and race relations issues, I think, more closely into that. And then, as we've also indicated, rolling forward with some of the fact review points into that as well. So there's an opportunity to get this right, to build on the good work. I've no doubt you're about to hear from those behind me that it has been happening, but there's more to be done, and it's up to us to really push that forward.
Okay.
Okay, Emma, please.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks to you all. It's lovely to have you here. I was going to ask about the Ending Violence Against Women and Girls strategy as well, and I suppose already appreciate the detail that you've already given, and delighted to see it being published last week and the progress that's been made. And I think probably even the visual of the 4 of yourselves here as ministers goes some way to challenging the norms and the attitudes that we know ultimately end up in femicide and violence against women. I suppose I would like to hear some detail from yourselves around what you see being the real life implications for people who've already suffered gender-based violence, and for the next generation of women and girls coming up who I would hope are not going to experience the same as what we all have.
I think sadly we can't change anybody's experience, particularly anybody who's experienced violence against women and girls, but I think what we can do is do what we're doing, which is to try to build that whole society approach that says no to misogyny, that says no to that everyday sexism, that says no to all the challenging attitudes and cultures that lead to the violence against women and girls. So I'm really proud of this piece of work that we have done, and as I said earlier, I'm so proud that in the way in which it was brought about, and that those people that are actually on the front line delivering services were part and parcel of the delivery. And I think, I wish this is something we could turn a switch and it would stop, but it's not the reality. The reality is that it will take time, but I think the interventions that have been set out, and particularly in terms of the first 2 years in the action plan, that's very deliberately targeted, those areas that we think that we can reach to very quickly, and that is consistency of messaging. What is violence against women and girls? What does it look like? Ensuring that every child growing up then understands what that looks like. So I do think that, I wouldn't want to say it'll take a generation to change things, but I do think that there's more education now than there ever was before, and I think the work that we're doing now with the strategy will obviously enhance that and give our young people, ensure that they're equipped with the tools in which to see this and to see it around them, and actually to support one another, but then also just that wider society piece, that this is not down to women to fix, this is not down to policing to fix, this is a whole of society approach, and it's about prevention, which goes to the heart of what we're trying to achieve, creating that society that's actually free from violence against women and girls, and that's why the whole focus of it is around the prevention piece.
Yeah, like at the heart of this is attitudinal change, and we know from a public policy perspective, attitudinal change is one of the toughest things to try to bring about, should it be within any department or from the executive perspective. But one of the, I think, really remarkable things since we launched the strategy is the number of women who have come forward and shared their very personal stories with me. I'm sure the junior ministers and Michelle are the same, where they've felt, I think, empowered to tell their experience, but also because they want, I think, us to understand the difficulties that they have faced in a real practical way. And that very often can be everything about trying to leave, getting the funding support to get new accommodation, navigating through a court system, from everything from property that's in a house to domestic violence issues to criminal charges that are brought. There are so many different elements, and I've been really surprised when listening to women about those stories that it's not just one or two, it's a whole range of practical challenges that they're facing. So I think what the message is that they're sending to us is they really, really think that this is a good piece of work. It's so necessary and they want that to happen. And a lot of this is at the attitudinal and the big policy, but there's also real practical things that need to be done to support women in that situation that they're not finding it easy to do. And I just want to bring Pam in just very briefly, because I know Pam has been engaging very much with Women's Aid and with other organisations about that practical side of it. But that is something that we do need to do more on, working with health and working with communities as well to support women in the community facing this today.
Thanks, Minister, and thank you, Chair. Good to see you all here and good to be here in these lovely refurbed committee rooms. Not like the bad old days in health, Paula.
That's right.
But I know we worked very well together in the past and collaboratively, and with Carol as well, in particular around the autism bill. And it's good to see, I have to give it a wee plug, good to see the reviewer rule finally rolled out and was hitting the ground running with doing some superb work so far. So it's good to see that. So good to be here today. And yes, I think the EVOG strategy, I everywhere we go, I tell everybody that I liken Ashley and myself to the Spice Girls, and I say this is Sporty Spice and I'm Old Spice because I've been here for so long. So in 2011 I made my maiden speech around domestic violence, and even back then you weren't even talking about domestic and sexual, you were only talking about domestic violence. And back then I remember very much it was a superb opportunity to actually raise awareness of the issue, because we were so far behind. And I think actually even looking, despite the funding difficulties, looking at where we are now in terms of awareness, the awareness is through the roof. Yes, there's been horrific murders and incidents and they continue, and that is wrong and that needs to be addressed, but the awareness I think is at an all-time high, which is wonderful in itself, and I think that's right what DFM are saying, that this is attitudinal change, societal change, and we all own responsibility for this going forward. And it's really important actually that this also touches upon Claire's subject around age. It covers all age ranges, and I always remember one of the first stories I was ever told, not a story, first experience I was ever told about a lady in a nursing home in her 80s living in a joint room with her husband, and this lady had dementia, but her husband didn't, and this lady was turning up with bruises and injuries, and nobody could understand how this was the case in this home. And when the GP was brought in, the GP was able to say, oh yes, there's a 60-year history of domestic violence in this family. The family knew about it, the home knew about it. Everybody knew about it. And the really sad thing was that the lady was moved out of the room to give her husband peace so he could sleep at night, but he was actually raping and beating her at night in that home. So we've come from afar, but these issues spread across all age ranges, and it is incumbent on us all as a society to take charge of it, and actually even as families to recognise and see and speak out and say what is wrong. And that's why it's so important to have men also speaking out and saying, no, that's not right, and actually you shouldn't say things like that. It is important. Sometimes we can think it's a little trivial, even just referring to how people speak to each other and how you refer to each other, but actually it does mean something, and I think that's all educational, and there's so much work to go forward. And so I'm very excited actually about where we are with the whole EVOG process, the organisations that we've been able to call out and see and work with, and will continue to do so, I think are incredible, and that co-design process has been fantastic, and I think we've seen a really wonderful outcome from that co-design process, and I just wish we had all the money in the world to do much more, much quicker, but I think we're making good headway, and we'll continue to do so. Okay.
Thanks, Chair. Just one more thanks for that, Pam, because the next question I want to ask was actually around the junior ministers and the role that you have played since you came into office, and what sort of work you've been doing. I don't know if yourself or Minister really want to.
Well, I suppose I can start and try and fit as much into about a minute of 8 months that I possibly can. And just to echo what Pam says, it's my first time in front of the committee, so thank you all very much. And I suppose since taking the office in February, both Junior Minister Cameron and I have been out and about as much as we possibly can. And I suppose for us, it is really important that not only the First Minister and Deputy First Minister are represented through us as much as possible, but also that the Executive Office is represented in terms of everything that they do. So it's really important, and I said this earlier on, that we're out, that we're listening, that we're accessible, and because often enough some people think that whatever happens up on the hill, that nobody can get speaking to ministers and elected representatives, and for us that's really not the case. So we're accessible, and we want to be out and about and engaging and listening as much as we possibly can. I could touch around a lot of the things that we've done, but even just to mention a couple of people, we visited the Schools of Sanctuary, Women's Aid that Pam has spoken about there. We were fortunate enough, we went out to the office in Brussels, so we were able to engage with the officials out there and the work that they're doing. We were at the Somme commemorations, and I think that's also really important, that we also reflect our shared history. And I suppose for all four of us, we went to the women's football game in Windsor, and that was also reciprocated in terms of coming to my home club of St Paul's. And I don't need to rehash my love, my graph for sport, and how it brings people together and enhances people's lives. For me, I've been to PSNI business events in Dublin and London, and that very much for me was delivering the message of the executive is that we're open for business, trade, investment. We want people to come here, live here, work here, and very much be proud of the North. North-South Ministerial Councils, you name it. We've been there, we've done it all. So it has been a really, really hectic 8 months, but I suppose for me, I'm really enjoying that. I hope you can see that we're enjoying it, and I hope the public can see that too, because for us it's about representing the people who have elected us here. That's really important for us.
Thank you. And yes, it's been a great privilege for me personally, a fantastic privilege to have a part in this role, and you really do feel it on the ground when you go see people, the appreciation and love actually that you receive for your time and your attention to them. It is incredible. So it's a wonderful feeling. You get that as an MLA when you're helping people and you're listening to people. And sometimes I think that can be the most valuable thing, is actually listening and letting people tell you what they need to tell you, what they want to tell you. So it is really good. I'm not going to repeat what Aisling has said, but the role is incredibly busy, and lots of events, speaking engagements, engaging with stakeholders and lobbyists, and feeding that back obviously into the system as well. And I'll give you an example actually of one meeting we did. Apologies, I was out for a few weeks there looking after my husband who hasn't been well, but before I went off, we had met with a group called AVUK. It's Auditory Verbal UK, and an incredible example. And I was able to actually meet with them again along with the Children's Commissioner the other day after I came back, and it was wonderful to hear experiences of children who have had very specific training, very different training that's not commonplace. It's only word of mouth people that have found out about it, which is it's training for children aged between birth and 5 years old, and that along with their cochlear implants is enabling these children to speak as you and I. You wouldn't know that they were profoundly deaf, and they are. Incredible enablement, which is promoting independence and giving them the fullness of life, but without actually, hearing that experience and being able then to take that back and then come back and write to Health Minister and say, look, what are you doing about this? This is a really important thing you should be looking at, because this is something truly transformative and the ideal type of thing that we need to be looking at in terms of investment, because the savings that the systems will come out with are incredible. There was one young girl there called Katie, and
Sorry,
she
Pam,
had...
I don't mean to move you on. It sounds brilliant, but we have one more speaker to get
Yes,
in.
apologies. It was just to say that, this little girl, 15-year-old, completely independent, wouldn't even take extra time exam, even though she was profoundly deaf. That's how empowering that is. But much good work going on.
Wonderful.
Much too much to tell you today.
Okay, to move on. Go ahead, Timothy. Thank
Thank you
you.
very much, Chair. So in today's Irish news, I've already talked about it. I've touched upon it, should I say. It highlights the fact that in February last year, First Minister, you were at an event in Stormont where Michael McGonigal was present. McMonigal was present. Also points out later the same month that Michael McMonigal met with Paul Maskey MP in Westminster. So we know what Mr Murphy said last night wasn't true. First Minister, you have said that you didn't see him at the event. Going by the photographs that have come to or have been published today, can the Junior Minister Riley say the same? And can you detail what your interaction was with Michael McMonigal on that day?
I'll take the question. I think I've already dealt with the question.
I think you
Chair,
have to, yes.
to be fair, horrified that anybody would give a reference in this scenario. Had they have asked my permission, it would not have happened. And I think that I've set out clearly earlier just in terms of the rest of it. So if there are any questions in relation to the Executive Office, very happy to take them.
Just before we go off that, can I ask if you checked to see if the references that were provided were done so on Sinn Féin headed paper?
I have confirmed very clearly that I did not give any okay to any references being given. I would not have seen them, given that I did not even know they existed until it came to my attention last week.
Did you ask for a
Okay,
couple
sorry.
of them?
You said you're only one question. Move on, please. Thank you.
Maria Cahill has cited your handling of the Michael McMonigal case as a reason why women have no faith in your ability to lead up the Ending Violence Against Women and Girls strategy. Last week, during question time, I asked and reminded you what you said in Radio Ulster in reference to the Maria Cahill case, where you said that it's not for me to say that I believe her. I'll give you the opportunity once again, First Minister. Do you believe Maria now?
Of course I do, and I would be really interested in this conversation if you actually cared about the feelings of any woman out there. I'm absolutely committed to leading on our strategy to end violence against women and girls. It is absolutely what is required in our society. We need to move to this preventative approach. We have launched an excellent strategy which has got the support of so many groups out there that are actually on the ground providing this work. I am determined to lead that work as I have done to this point, and I will continue to do so.
Okay, I'm going to draw a line there.
Thank you.
There's many members here today, only got opportunity for 2 questions. You've got 3, Timothy, there, so I am going to draw a line there.
Related to TO.
What's and yes, yes,
Yeah.
yes.
They need to be related to the department.
Okay,
How it
ministers.
works.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much.
Thank you, ministers, for coming. We hope you will be back in front of us in the next few months to give us more updates on your work, but we appreciate it for now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, members, take your ease for a minute while we change the panel. Thank you.
Seats don't grow back.
It is not stuffy.
Isn't it stuffy?
But I'm always hot.
Okay, members, moving on then. Thank you.
Absolutely. Let's get your number because I haven't got it.
Okay, members, so we're going to move on to the next session then. So
Yeah.
it is in relation to the recent race incidents, and we're going to receive a departmental oral briefing, and I would refer you to page 210 of the clerk's brief and page 5 of the table pack for the departmental brief. So we are going to welcome to the meeting Ricky Irwin, who's Director of Communities in Transition and Racial Equality, and Orla McStravick, who's the Director of Refugee and Asylum Support and Integration Division within the Executive Office. So similar to the ministers, if you can keep your opening remarks as brief as possible to allow as much time, because we've one more panel after you. So thank you for coming. It's such short notice, but you'll appreciate how important it is for us as a committee to get an update on the asks within the recall motion. So when you're ready.
Thanks, Chair. Good afternoon.
Thank you.
Thanks for inviting us here. We'd like to thank the committee for the opportunity to provide a briefing on the work that the department is taking forward on racial equality and asylum seeker and refugee integration. Members have received a briefing paper and will therefore be aware of the background to and purpose of our work. The paper gives a flavour of some of the key priorities and, importantly, how we are delivering the actions of the Racial Equality Strategy 2015 to 2025 and working under the auspices of the draft Refugee Integration Strategy. The Racial Equality Strategy established a framework for action by all government departments to tackle racial inequalities, to eradicate racism and hate crime, and along with Together Building a United Community policy to promote good race relations and social cohesion. Of the 11 proposed actions in the strategy, the majority have been completed, while the remaining actions are intended to continue throughout the remainder of the period. Through the strategy, we aim to build a truly shared and united society, regardless of people's political, religious or ethnic backgrounds. But as the strategy acknowledged, we are under no illusion about the size of the challenge involved in tackling racial inequalities, and this has been brought into even sharper focus by recent events. Additionally, it also recognises that each and every one of us has a responsibility to play our part in combating racism and racial inequalities. Full implementation requires the support and active participation of all sections of society and not government alone. One of our key aims has been to establish dedicated structures to ensure racial equality is given a continued focus and that there is a strong link with our minority ethnic population. A network of racial equality champions has been established in each department. This was a strong demand from the minority ethnic sector expressed during the public consultation on the strategy. The racial equality champions ensure that messages about the importance of racial equality and good race relations are consistent and visible to all staff across government departments. Champions work with the racial equality subgroup to identify gaps in the services provided by those departments and how to close them. The strategy also committed to establishing the racial equality subgroup to function as a strong voice to government on issues specifically affecting minority ethnic people, migrants and race relations. We're committed to providing a platform to those with lived experience. The subgroup has a significant role to play in supporting delivery of current priorities and for steering future priorities. In 2023, it established the Hate Crime Working Group, which engages with representatives from the Department of Justice Hate Crime Delivery Group, the Hate Crime Advocacy Service, Victim Support and the PSNI. The working group has deemed priority actions for statutory bodies being to improve the reporting of hate crime, to support victims of hate crime and to review and strengthen legislation. The need to provide the best possible legal protection against racism was also highlighted as a key action of the current strategy, and following a public consultation held in 2023, the review of the current Race Relations Northern Ireland Order 1997 has been completed. The resulting report, which was published on the 5th of August this year, will inform the basis for any legislative changes and will move us a step closer towards a more equal and safe society. In the wake of an escalation of race hate incidents during the latter part of 2023, the Executive Office also convened a cross-departmental working group comprising of senior officials across government departments and statutory agencies to consider the preventative measures and interventions that can be designed and delivered to create an inclusive and supportive environment for all. A number of options were identified, including an area-based approach potentially funded under Peace Plus, and work is ongoing in this regard. Another key element of our work is the Minority Ethnic Development Fund. It has enabled hundreds of projects and groups to support minority ethnic people. In line with the review of the fund, the 3-year funding scheme is currently in place from April 22 to March 25, helping to provide successful groups with greater stability and enabling longer-term planning and support. And there are 31 successful applications currently being supported through MEDF, which is worth approximately £1.1 million per annum. As well as core funding, the MEDF also provides project funding, supporting varying activities such as the Belfast Mila, and smaller projects such as English language classes, support for victims of hate crime and human trafficking, and training to service providers and other organisations. The Executive Office has also provided funding for the Crisis Fund since 2014. Small sums of money are provided at key moments of transition for minority ethnic people and migrant workers, such as after losing work, reduced hours or family breakdown, and it is an important bridge to prevent destitution and homelessness and help save on displacement costs elsewhere. It's administered on TO's behalf by the Red Cross, and the current budget is just over £180,000 per annum. Whilst it will remain a key priority to fully deliver the commitments in the current racial equality strategy, which is in place until December 2025, it is important that post-2025 there's a clear mechanism, an overarching framework for achieving racial equality in our society. The Executive recognises the need to work collaboratively with stakeholders and the wider minority ethnic sector to ensure an inclusive process which informs the development of any future proposals. Officials have initiated a round of stakeholder engagement in anticipation of the expiration of the current strategy, and last month held an initial scoping exercise with the racial equality subgroup and the thematic groups to determine key actions and a vision for post-2025. So Orla will now provide brief opening comments in relation to progress on the refugee integration strategy.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ricky. And members will recall our session in May, so I don't plan to sort of repeat all of that, and hopefully leave as much time as possible for discussion and questions. I think it's just important to reinforce our commitment to publishing a refugee integration strategy and to make here a place of sanctuary for all. That said, we do fully appreciate the complexities and challenges associated, and the events over the summer here have demonstrated that we have some way to go in this area. We expect the delivery of a strategy will certainly help combine and focus our collective efforts in this regard. A revised draft strategy is currently under consideration. It's been informed by analysis of public consultation, research, including on lived experience, and ongoing engagement with organisations who are directly supporting refugees and those seeking international protection. You'll be aware from our previous discussion that we've been collaborating with colleagues in departments and other stakeholders to develop an associated thematic delivery plan. So it's clear how we'll actually seek to achieve the outcomes and visions of any final strategy. So whilst we plan, following ministerial and executive consideration, to publish a final strategy and delivery plan, we continue to work with colleagues across departments to progress work to support integration in parallel. So just in closing, I'd underscore our commitment to creating an environment where everyone can benefit from a fair and inclusive society, and where no one is left behind and people are made to feel welcome and safe, and we're very happy to take discussions and questions.
Okay, thank you both. Good to have you back at committee. So I'm just going to kick off in terms of the review of the Race Relations Order. Obviously it's 27 years now and entirely out of date. So the consultation ended in June 2023, so nearly a year and a half ago. So I appreciate that the analysis report was only probably signed off in the summer for circulation, but I'm just wondering, because there was such, the recall motion in the summer, there was cross-party, cross-chamber agreement that if there's any way you can bring the legislation forward within this legislative programme 24-25. So I'm just wondering, what is the hold-up? Please.
So ministers agreed to the publication of the consultation report in August of this year. There are over 50 proposed changes in the legislation. It's very far-reaching. It's intended to cover all aspects of society in terms of education, health, employment, and to bring us to a level where we would either be the same or exceed legislative protection in the rest of the UK or in the Republic. Ministers have agreed to put it on the legislative programme for 25-26 because the legislative programme for this year is already full, as you have said. There's a process, Chair, that we need to go through.
I didn't say it was full. I said it's been published. I think we as a committee could probably take it for scrutiny if he's brought it forward. Go ahead.
There's a process that we need to go through now in terms of bringing a paper to the Executive with the full scope of legislative changes. We also need to engage with the Office of Legislative Counsel in terms of the drafting. So we have started those processes. If it can be brought forward, that will be a decision for ministers, but we're certainly on the road to bringing the legislation forward.
Okay, so I suppose the concern I have is that was meant to bring forward then the ability for the ethnic minority monitoring, you know, that would be an enabler. So I suppose from the point of view of the groups that are operating in this space, 2005 they were saying that they wanted this brought forward, so you know, they just feel that there's a bit of a delay there. So I am wondering about you've said about the draft refugee integration strategy and the work that's been done in terms of facilitating the allocation of dispersal funds across councils, etc., and the objectives of that, even though it's not been signed off. So obviously we've got a lot of contingency accommodation in South Belfast, and my colleague Kate Nicholl and I have met with a lot of the families who are in the hotels, and I have to say they are so marginalised from society, and I'm just not sure how you are measuring whether that money is actually getting to the people who need it in terms of the asylum seekers. And some of them have actually had their refugee status confirmed, but because they can't get any accommodation. But I mean, it's as close to a prison cell as you'd get. They have to turn their lights off at 9 o'clock, and the kids aren't allowed to run around the hotel lobby, etc. So I'm just wondering, are you satisfied that this money is going to the right causes, and it's not being chipped away at the different levels of administration on the way down through the councils?
Yeah, no, the full dispersal funding, and there was previous funding given to councils. We've only recently been able to confirm full dispersal allocations for this year. We got confirmation from Home Office that we will now get full dispersal, and we took that to our strategic planning group. Councils is one element of it. I mean, we've done a range of things with the full dispersal funding. The funding it's not funding that's allocated specifically for asylum seeker, it is for dispersal, so it's to support the sort of building of capacity and infrastructure beyond Belfast, because people are generally having to move beyond Belfast now in the longer term, because Belfast is at capacity, and that's historically where asylum seekers would have been accommodated. So there's a range of things that have been done with the dispersal money. I mean, one of them was the DFI pilot that we were able to support for the free transport for asylum seekers, and again, that was in recognition of where people may have been in Belfast, moved out of Belfast, or may need to access services that are Belfast based, that asylum seekers were then given the travel cards for a 6-month pilot to be able to do that. So the councils is only one element of the full dispersal. There's other elements of that money that have been used in different ways, the DFI pilot being one of them, and I know that they have certainly that one has come back with really, really positive responses, particularly from asylum seekers themselves, who have really valued the ability to be able to do that, which we wouldn't have been able to do without the full dispersal funding. I mean, obviously in terms of the contingency accommodation, the accommodation provision isn't devolved, and that is
I appreciate that, but it's that integration piece around the objectives.
Absolutely, and I know sort of from the engagement that we have with Home Office, which we do regularly, in terms of contingency accommodation, you know, people are now staying in contingency accommodation for much less time than they would have been before.
Well, I have some constituents who are there for years.
There are some exceptional cases, but you know, generally on average now people are in hotels. They move into contingency accommodation and move out of contingency accommodation within about a 4-week period. Albeit there are some that have been there in the longer term for a variety of reasons. We can't actually take any action on that because it's not within our gift in the devolved space to do that. But certainly, we have been out and we've been into hotels ourselves and spoke to families and spoke to people that are in the contingency accommodation to get their experiences. And I know the last time I was in, it was a more positive picture than what we had before in terms of people's own views and experiences. There are reducing numbers that are in contingency accommodation, and certainly we're working with Home Office to try and support the dispersal of people out of contingency accommodation and into their longer term accommodation provision, and certainly anything that we can do. I mean, I know in some of the hotels they had some groups come in and deliver ESOL in the hotel spaces, and others that come in and offered sort of, you know, trips out and things for people to engage, recognising that people were quite isolated in hotels. So there are things that are happening, and the dispersal money is very helpful in terms of what we're able to do with it, but it is limited in that regard, and there's only so much we can do.
No, I appreciate that. I think we as a committee have agreed that we would try to get mayors here to actually talk about that, so thank you for that. I'll just move on to my last question, and that's really in the notes you've said that you've been engaging with colleagues across government departments and agencies to explore how financial support can be provided to businesses damaged or impacted by the protests, and that you will seek to highlight any available support to those affected. So obviously the attacks were about 8 weeks ago, and we just wish you could give us an update on where we're at with that.
Yeah, so in the immediate aftermath Belfast City Council really took the lead in terms of trying to coordinate, and I think they made a decision that they would provide financial support to some of the businesses that were immediately impacted. There was also, I'm aware, a separate private funding campaign that was done for those businesses, a GoFund campaign, which provided a significant amount of money. And the third thing is the UK government has allocated £50 million for a community recovery fund to deal with the aftermath of the disorder in July and August of this year, of which 600,000 has been allocated to the Belfast Local Authority area. So we're now working with the NIO and DOF on how that money will be distributed and who would benefit from that, and it goes much further than just businesses being impacted. It's also to support voluntary and community activity, even individual households and so on. So we're just working through the detail of that now.
But obviously there's a sense of urgency because there's people who this was their livelihood and now their business is burnt. So are you assured that it's moving at the right pace? We
keep in touch with Belfast City Council, so I would be assured that the money has been expedited as quickly as they could get it out onto the ground.
Okay, thank you. Deputy Chair, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks both Orla and Ricky for coming to committee today. I think first thing that concerned me was we've had this strategy now for 10 years on racial equality. But in the last year alone, we've seen a third in the rise of race hate incidents that's been reported by the PSNI. I'm conscious they're coming next after you to chat to us. But do you think, how do you think that reflects on the strategy? And do you think from the next one in a few years, do you think we'll need to do something drastically different?
So I think the strategy was written at a time in 2015, which is now completely out of date. However, the actions within it were probably the right actions to be taken forward. And we know, and we do have evidence that they've actually improved relations with the minority ethnic sector here. So there was a report that was published 2 weeks ago by NISRA, the Racial Equality Indicators report, and that really supports the delivery of the strategy itself and tells us, for example, that children and young people from minority ethnic background are achieving the most they've ever achieved in terms of 5 or more GCSEs A star to C, for example. That more people now have friends from minority ethnic background than ever before. That in terms of managerial positions within the private sector, it's comparable with white population. So the evidence is there to suggest that the strategy has been very successful. The events, obviously, of the summer are something which have happened out of the blue very quickly and tell us that we definitely have more work to do, and we know that. So I think our efforts now are turning to what a new strategy would actually look like. What is the focus of that? We've already done some work with the racial equality subgroup to try and come up with the vision and the outcomes that we need for that new strategy. And obviously, race hate is going to be one of those issues that needs to be addressed. I very much want to learn from the experience of the Violence Against Women and Girls team in terms of their approach to what is a societal issue, and I think racism is equally a societal issue. And it's a complex one, it's a multifaceted one, and it's one which we need to take a proportionate response to. So we're going to be looking at the lessons from that and the lessons from the Tackling Paramilitarism programme in terms of identifying what are the risk factors, what are the protective factors, what are the interventions that are going to make the most impact in terms of racism, what's the preventative work that we need to do, what's the more targeted work, and what's the reactive work that needs to be in place. So there's a considerable amount of work to be done, but we want to do that with minority ethnic sector at the heart of it. Thank
you. I think co-design and having the voices of people who are affected by this are really important. And I'm not sure if you saw one of our previous committee meetings a few weeks ago. We had representatives from the sector, but also people who had been directly impacted by the riots during the summer. And some of the stuff they told us was just it was damning. And one of them, particularly around TU and the funding, it was that they felt the funding is not getting to organisations that are run by and for migrants and ethnic minority groups. In terms of being on the other side in TU and being, dispersing that funding, what would you have to say to that?
Well, I would say obviously we can always do better. I think the Minority Ethnic Fund is our primary vehicle for supporting the sector here. It has been very successful in supporting smaller organisations, providing core funding for salaries that wouldn't have been available anywhere else, supporting project work on the ground and building good community and race relations across various communities. So we have approximately 30 organisations that we're supporting at the minute. It is a limited amount of money. I think I mentioned at the start it's 1.1 million per annum. I would like to see more money. In fact, I will ask for more money. But we have had positive feedback on the MEDF, and we are always listening to what the sector has to say about that. And at the workshop that we had recently around a new strategy, MEDF was cited as both a positive and a negative. So I think we need to take that on board. We did review it in 2020, and we implemented recommendations from that. So, for example, instead of 1 year funding for organisations, we put 3 year funding in place, and that's running up to March of next year. So we have tried to refine it based on feedback from the sector. But of course, if there's more that we can do, then I think we need to do that. What we have seen actually is a reduction year on year on the number of applications coming forward from the sector, from MEDF. So the biggest communities don't always have a need for funding, and then there are smaller organisations which don't necessarily want to get constituted to be able to apply for funding. So what we do is we encourage the larger organisations to support the smaller ones in partnership applications, and for them to provide guidance and support in the delivery of smaller projects.
Can I just pick up on that point, because obviously there's quite a lot of these based in South Belfast, and I suppose what puts off, it's not just getting constituted, but it's the paperwork, it's the monitoring. You know, you have an event and everybody gets a sheet shoved in front of them. So I'm just wondering in terms of how they're having to, the administrative, the governance part of it. I think that's as much puts them off as you know, the status of their group.
Yeah, well, obviously with public money there comes certain responsibilities, and we have certain governance procedures that we need to adhere to. We apply those proportionately. We're aware that some of the groups are smaller. The team are very good in supporting them through their claims for applications for payment, for example. So we do everything that we can, and we encourage larger, established organisations to work with those smaller ones to try and help them through that process. But if we can streamline it any more for future rounds, I will certainly try to do that.
Okay, good stuff. Carol, please.
So, thanks for coming. I mean, Ricky, you're involved in CIT as well.
Yep.
And while I'm not wanting to link, I mean, just conscious of the point that Paula made earlier about that programme needs to be extended to other areas, certainly after review. But one of the issues that the groups that Connie mentioned were up with us, they felt really, really disenfranchised. They felt like they were consulted as an afterthought, and things were put on their behalf without their consent almost. And for me, that's very concerning, because clearly we're representative of a lot of the groups, particularly based in South Belfast. So it's just about lessons learned. What can we do? I heard what you said about bigger groups trying to help the smaller ones, but clearly that wasn't working. So that's my first question. And then in terms of just the summer we went through, I mean, I know some of the groups through CIT are doing very, very good work. They really are. And everybody's doing really good work to try and challenge the scourge of racism. But we're actually seeing people now, like there's families who don't want to leave the house still in October. And despite, you know, the supports that have been given, they are absolutely petrified. So, you know, what, in terms of that multi-agency approach that you're taking, what actions have been taken as a result of the summer outside of what you've just mentioned? If you could give me an update on those, I'd really appreciate it.
Yep. Okay. So I suppose immediately, TEO, we were involved in the community safety response that was dealing with the events as they were happening. Work that was led by DOJ and the PSNI. But other agencies were there, like the Trusts and the Youth Justice Agency, ourselves and the Challenge Commissioner and so on. So
is this just at meetings rather than on the streets?
No, this would have been in terms of what actions needed to be put in place straight away, for example, for the safeguarding of children within certain homes, for contingency hotel security, for families that have been disrupted. So there was a lot of work that was done in the immediate aftermath. There was a lot of work that was done then by the likes of the Department of Education and the Education Authority around security for schools and making sure children could get to school, because that was raised as a key issue in terms of what was happening. So we have been involved in that. We had already established a group within TEO, and that was on the back of a rise in anti-migrant sentiment in 2023. So the posters, the graffiti, the attacks on housing executive staff and so on properties. And that was looking at what can we do longer term, what can be done here, essentially to stop the hate incidents. That actually led to the Peace Plus application, which I referred to at the start, which will be an area-based application providing funding to 35 specific areas if it's successful, which will be designed to try and build relations, and particularly build community relations within minority ethnic communities, asylum seeker and refugee and other communities. So we're hoping that will come out. We've also been working on a campaign about how do we get a unified and consistent message to condemn what has been happening out there. You heard ministers earlier on being very clear on their condemnation of the violence and disorder. We want to build on that. They've showed their support for the sector, so there will be a series of events that will help put that message out there. So that will be something else as well. There are a lot of myths to be dispelled out there in terms of, for example, the allocation of housing and the delivery of public services. So we want
access to GPs and access to schools and
absolutely,
absolutely.
So we need to get those clear, and within this group, which has all the key departments, statutory agencies, PSNI, and the housing executive, make sure that we're all clear on what the messages and the facts actually are in this space. And then we, I think, are now turning our attention to how do we address race hate in the longer term, and that's where I'd already talked about the new strategy. How do we work with those who have the lived experience of what has happened over the summer, and how do we get them into the heart of that process? So I think this is going to take us a wee bit of time. There's things that we've done already, there are things that we plan to do, but there are things that we haven't thought of yet that we need to.
Oh, sorry, can I just interrupt? The question I want to ask is, for those families, Ricky, who particularly were impacted in South Belfast, who are still living in fear now, what is done in addition to help those families? I mean, I heard what you said about the schooling, it was a very practical example.
Yeah.
But even through the likes of migrant help, and if they're refugee or if they're asylum seekers, I mean, we're trying to get mirrors in, but I just found the approach, the initial approach, a bit bitsy and all over the place. And if, God forbid, we're ever to face another lot of months like that, we need to learn lessons from the summer.
I think that's right, Carol. I think there was a strong partnership approach that was very swift. And I think we need to learn from that and apply that going forward to the group that I mentioned that we have, which involves, you know, all those agencies. I know that some of those families will have benefited from support from the groups who are on the racial equality subgroup and the ones that we fund through the MEDF. I also know that some of those families would have benefited from crisis fund intervention, because essentially that's what the crisis fund is for, as a temporary measure. So if there's anything more that we can be doing there, I very much welcome knowing what that is, but at least we are trying to do something there. I don't know, Orla, if there's something on your side.
I was maybe just going to add to that as well, because part of our role within TEO, obviously we engage with the Home Office in terms of the non-devolved and the impact here. And in light of the balance over the summer, we had facilitated a multi-agency meeting with Home Office, mayors and local departments and agencies here, and part of that was to try and understand what was happening for those that were impacted by the violence, that were obviously in fear, as you've talked about, that were in either Home Office accommodation or potentially housing executive accommodation. So, you know, just for information, you know, what we were made aware of and what we were assured of is that all of those people who were in mayors accommodation in areas where they had been impacted by the violence were being offered additional support, including those in hotels, that they were being offered the opportunity to move accommodation from both housing executive and from mayors. So, you know, if there are people still living in fear, and if that isn't happening and is the case, we're very happy to take that back and engage on that, because we were, as part of that engagement, those were the assurances that we were given, that people were being given, you know, not just welfare support in terms of in the hotel accommodation but also, you know, maybe if people needed or wanted personal protection devices, or if they felt they needed to be moved to accommodation, that could certainly be considered. So it's just to flag if there are still cases where people are feeling that fear, and that hasn't transpired, we are happy to pick that up.
Okay, thank you. Emma, please.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks to you both for the presentation and your time. I suppose I had a question around, we know an awful lot of the violence that we've seen at the summer was a direct reaction to misinformation and scaremongering and very, very cynical campaign of hatred, mostly online. And Paula and Carol and others have reflected on, you know, the difficulties that an awful lot of the people who are coming here face when they're trying to access the very basic services and trying to access the rights and the struggle that they have. Is there a role for the department in trying to shed a bit of light on just the reality of these people's living conditions and, you know, sort of bust those myths in terms of, you know, the stereotypes that exist out there and the misinformation that there is around the support that people are entitled to, when really, you know, as you say, they're living in DP centres?
I think that's the bit that you refer to in terms of that cross-departmental working group. That's one of the things that group has been looking at in terms of how do we not just get a united narrative around all of this, but how do we sort of, what is the myth and what is the actual response to this? You know, even in terms of what is a refugee, what is an asylum seeker, what are their entitlements, what are the housing allocation protocols, you know, how are school places accessed, to try and address some of those myths. So that is actually a piece of work that we're looking at through that cross-departmental working group.
I think, thanks, Chair. I think that would be useful both for the general public and for, you know, MLAs as well, because it's been one of my ongoing frustration that the use of that term legitimate concerns and how harmful that has been in equating, you know, a lack of public services with, you know, the right to abuse innocent people who have done nothing but try and make a better life for themselves. So
we did start some of that through engagement through the
Shared City
Partnership, where again we were, you know, and you know, we were looking at other options to how we could, you know, widen the net in terms of trying to get some of this information out there.
I think we want to try and reach local representatives, political representatives as well, and work with policing and community safety partnerships. And some of them have approached me both in terms of tackling paramilitarism, but also on the recent race hate stuff. So it's been actually very useful to have those joined up conversations, and they're very keen that their actions align with our actions in TEO.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Harry, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. I was going to actually ask you what steps are you taking today that you weren't taking prior to the summer of 2024, but Carol is really well drew down in that, so I don't need to do that. If you could just maybe tell me, has it required extra staffing or funding to do what you are now doing?
Well, maybe I'll start. Well, we're still working with the same level of staffing within the department, so obviously it's been pressurised, but the staff have stepped up to the challenge and have been able to make things happen very quickly. In terms of funding, no additional funding came my way, unfortunately. I did mention the £15 million Community Recovery Fund, which the UK Government have announced, so we're very keen that we make sure that the 600k for Northern Ireland is targeted to those that need it most to deliver the most impactful interventions, so that is, at least is some additional money. Orla?
Yeah, no, I mean the same, there hasn't been an additional budget or staffing, but I think actually being able to work even through the structures that we have across departments has been helpful, because we're able to join up better and you know, avoid the risk of us all going off and doing things in isolation. But in terms of, you know, quantum of staff and budget, no, there hasn't been a change in that.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Brian, please.
Okay, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Ricky and Orla, for attending today and had dealings with you both in previous capacities.
Yes.
Feels like a different lifetime now.
That was a long time ago.
Certainly the events of this summer have been shocking to me, as it has been to many people, and really I think the worst ever race hate incidents that we've ever had in Northern Ireland. So it's a major challenge for society in Northern Ireland, as it is across Europe. And I mean, I do want to say that I mean, immigration policy is a legitimate matter of political debate and a concern that people can raise. And I've had many conversations with people around immigration policy and practice. But that must be balanced with recognition of the massive contribution to our society, which is indispensable, that immigrants and newcomer communities make to our public services, our economy, and to society as a whole, and also the rights of those seeking asylum and the rights that they have. So my question is about, in terms of what funding and support there is around promoting integration, tolerance, recognition of diversity, given that Northern Ireland is becoming more international all the time and our newcomers communities are increasing and contributing to society, how is, whatever funding and interventions you have, how is that reaching into communities to reach areas where some of these incidents have occurred this summer, and to promote that recognition of diversity and to support people who are wanting to help racial integration?
May I start? So one of the key outcomes of the current strategy is around celebrating cultural diversity. Another one is around increasing participation of minority ethnic people in society. So everything that we fund through the Minority Ethnic Development Fund has to link to the outcomes in the strategy. So we do assess applications on the basis of how they reach into communities, how they develop good community relations, what is the level of need, and what tangible outcomes there will be. I think we need to look at how much money is being provided there. MEDF isn't the only source of funding for the sector. It's important to stress that. So under the Central Good Relations Fund, there are opportunities, and indeed many MEDF funded organisations also receive funding from TEO through the Central Good Relations Fund. And I think likewise with the Good Relations funding through the councils, minority ethnic organisations also receive funding there. So we do try to join up and get a whole picture to make sure that we're not double funding, to make sure that there's complementarity within the sector, and that any gaps in terms of the targeting, either geographical or need, are actually being addressed.
Okay.
Yeah, in terms of, funding wise, as we talked a wee bit about some of the funding streams that we have, including the full dispersal. I think that's particularly why we had been keen to try and allocate where we could funding to councils, because they are on the ground, they are closer, they know what exists in the areas, and they know what's happening in the areas. Now we have just been able to confirm full dispersal funding there recently for this year, including an allocation for councils, and we bring the councils together in terms of our council engagement group, where they can look at learning and best practice from what they have done with the money in each of their own areas, and to look to see is there nearly like a model that could be developed that might need adjustments in different areas to allow for the local context, but that would be your minimum standard. And I do, at the minute, we're working with councils now to see, in terms of the amount of money that we have been able to provide from the full dispersal money, how that can be best used across councils and what they would be able to do with that. And I think, although we would have liked to have had that money earlier and had this in place, whilst we only got confirmation there in the summer from Home Office, it does actually allow us an opportunity now to look at it in the context of what has been happening, and is there different things that councils may decide need done in certain areas in that respect. But funding, as we're all well aware, it is limited, but I do think it's something, even in the context of going forward and wider refugee integration work, that we'll always look to learn from what has happened over the summer, and if there's additional things that we need to do in that regard.
Okay, thank you. Claire, please.
Thank you, Chair. It's to kind of pick up on a couple of points that other members have said, just beginning with the Chair and your comments around accommodation. Am I right in saying that whenever an asylum seeker gets leave to remain as part of their application, then they do come into the local system in terms of being accommodated? And I suppose really it's just the conversation around that and how long that the application process in itself is taking to happen. I know that's not necessarily a question directly for you, it's probably more for the Home Office, but it does then have an impact at the point in which they're then seeking accommodation which is in the devolved space. So it's really just your kind of thoughts and comments in relation to that, because I am speaking with statutory agencies and I do think they're feeling under pressure, not just with this, but just the lack of accommodation generally. And the chair is 100%, you know, we have families in our constituency, maybe 8 people in a room in hostels, and that's horrific. You know, so I suppose it's what is the executive doing collectively, and I know it's potentially a Department for Communities Housing executive issue, but it's they're not able to address it. And then the second point was just in around the perceptions of immigration. Correct me if I'm wrong again, but I understand that this term illegal immigrants is actually incorrect, because at the point in which they arrive in the jurisdiction of the United Kingdom, they have an international right to apply for asylum. Therefore, anyone within the jurisdiction isn't actually illegal. It's the routes in which they get into the jurisdiction that are potentially illegal. And I think it's about debunking that myth, because that ultimately puts the responsibility at the UK government level rather than what happens when those individuals themselves get here. So there's great information online, you know, in refugee lobby groups or whatever else, just to try and, I suppose, put that out there, because, you know, illegal immigrants, illegal immigration is very widely used at the minute, but it's a factually incorrect term in accordance with the law. So it's really, how do we debunk those things? Because, you know, legitimate concerns, I think people fear the unknown and they fear a lack of information. And maybe when they're in our jurisdiction, then we need to be addressing that in some way and maybe putting that out there.
And I do think that term illegal immigration, I think it's coming from the Illegal Migration Act, and people are interpreting that as illegal immigration. It is actually the routes of arrival, and again, that's part of this myth busting piece, that somebody who arrives here, you know, is illegal. You know, they're not. They can claim asylum. It was part of the IMA where they weren't able to actually claim asylum, so that those were on hold. But that has now changed again with the new government that's come in, and those claims are now being processed, and they can go through the asylum system like everybody else. In terms of your first point on housing, I mean, I think, and you know, I'm not going to lie, it's a really challenging area. We refer to it as the move on process. So effectively, when somebody gets a positive decision, they then get notice from Home Office to leave their whatever accommodation they're in through MERS, but they can then obviously have the right to present to the housing executive as homeless or destitute and seek housing executive. So, and it is really difficult, and we're well aware of the cases where people are in non-standard accommodation in the devolved space, just because of the pressures on housing. We have a TO lead, a move on coordination group, where we have like housing executive, health colleagues, ourselves all involved in that, and we work very closely with Home Office to get more information in terms of the planned decisions that are coming down the line. Now we can't magic houses for everybody, and we have had some issues with notice periods in the past where we're not necessarily getting the notice that we should get to allow people to move on, and therefore housing executive are trying to find them urgent accommodation, which isn't ideal. But we do have that. It's a fortnightly group that meets and goes through what's forecast, what's coming down the line, how can we prepare and plan for this. We've also facilitated some information sharing agreements between the likes of, you know, housing executive and education authority, and housing executive and health as well, so that they can share information on people who are coming into the system, who then maybe move somewhere temporarily outside of their initial location, because that will obviously impact on school placements, GP registrations. So our role in all of that is facilitating, leading that group, facilitating those discussions. It does still unfortunately mean that with the pressures, people are moved into non-standard accommodation for a period of time until they get longer term accommodation, but we're trying as much as we can to minimise the impact as far as possible. And as I say, part of that is about the data coming through, to understand what's coming, and the sharing of that data to try and manage it as best we can. And we continue to work with the Home Office and MERS on that as well.
Yeah, very quick. It's maybe a different perspective on this, but it's a thought with a constituent case that we had. But immigrants who are coming here to work, so whether it's in terms of skilled work in hospitals and all of that, and we have a very small number of HMOs in Northern Ireland for the purpose of people, you know, and it's quite different to what happens in GB. It might be worth the department looking into that and seeing if there's a way to enhance that, because one of the biggest problems is our own workforce is quite limited. So we do, you know, it's immigrants and people coming to here that's filling those gaps. But one of the biggest challenges is actually finding them accommodation. And I expect that will then have an impact on the other pressures with accommodation. So it's just around the HMO piece, sorry, and if the department would maybe look at that. They can get planning permission for it, but it's just not widely used.
Okay, I'm going. If you can just note it, but no, we don't want any more in South Belfast, so thank you very much. Okay, thank you so much for today. Members, I'm going to take a 5-minute comfort break, but thank you guys, and no doubt you'll be back in front of us in a few months. But if there are any updates, please send them through, because we are obviously very interested in this area. Just going to close session, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Committee Room 30, sound. 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 Committee Room 30, Sound.
Thank you. Okay, so we're just going to resume our meeting this afternoon with our third oral briefing, and this time it's from the PSNI. So I'm just going to welcome to the meeting Bobby Singleton, who's the Assistant Chief Constable, and Paddy Mullen, who is Chief Inspector. So if you'd like to make some opening remarks, thank you.
Okay, well, good afternoon, Chair and members. Can I say, first of all, thanks to you and the committee for accepting our request to give evidence before you this afternoon. We're here principally to talk about Operation Alephnal, the police in response to the events of the 3rd of August and beyond, but also hopefully to talk about our ongoing work to tackle all forms of hate crime, but in particular race hate crime. What we saw over 7 days at the start of August was the eruption of despicable racist violence and intimidation, largely across the Greater Belfast area. Sadly, this didn't come from nowhere, as we had already been experiencing a steady escalation in race hate across the UK and indeed the island of Ireland, really since this time last year. In statistical terms, as has been alluded to, our most recent operational figures would indicate that racially motivated hate crime in Northern Ireland could have increased by a factor of over a third in the last 12 months alone. Operation Alephnal saw rioting on our streets, people and police officers attacked, businesses and vehicles destroyed. The policing operations on the 3rd of August and the following 7 days were extremely challenging for the police service, a fact that was underlined by our unprecedented request for mutual aid from Police Scotland. Whilst on the 3rd of August, police commanders were able to prevent the unnotified procession from reaching the Belfast Islamic Centre, they were, however, left frustrated and disappointed that they could not prevent the spontaneous attacks that then took place on property, both in Belfast city centre on that day, but then in subsequent evenings across the city centre. I want to be clear, however, that had it not been for the intervention and the brave actions of our officers, 20 of whom were injured in the process, there's absolutely no doubt in my mind that this situation could have been much worse and we could have been looking at a serious loss of life. As is our practice, we will now be debriefing the entirety of Operation Alephnal, and we'll have a community voice reflected through that process to make sure that if there are things that we could and should have done differently, that they're identified, and where there are lessons for the police service, I can assure you that they will be drawn out and applied as quickly as possible. You've heard yourselves on this committee that whilst many of us have returned to normal after the events at the start of August, for the community there remains a very real sense of fear within them. This is completely unacceptable. It won't be tolerated by the Police Service of Northern Ireland, and I think that everybody needs to call this out. We want to be crystal clear today that the Police Service of Northern Ireland stands entirely with our ethnic minority communities. We'll continue to do everything in our power to find, arrest and bring those responsible for the violence and intimidation before the courts. A significant investigation remains ongoing. Our team are working through over 3,500 hours of CCTV and body-worn footage. They've now made 49 arrests and 39 people have been charged to court, and certainly I'm pleased by the robust response as well that the courts have provided to this. I want to assure you and the community that there is much more to come. For a number of years now, we've worked really hard to reach out to minority communities. In fact, you could trace this back to what I would describe as our very poor handling of Black Lives Matter protests. We've had a specific focus in trying to increase confidence in policing with the black and minority ethnic community, and in particular to encourage them to come forward and report hate crime to police. I'm joined this afternoon by Chief Inspector Paddy Mullen, who leads our strategic community engagement team. And Paddy's small team alongside our neighbourhood officers have been critical to our regular engagement, proactive engagement with ethnic minority communities. And that engagement became critical in the aftermath of what we saw at the start of August, and helped us in terms of providing advice, reassurance and the support that the communities needed in the immediate aftermath. Having recognised the growing number of race hate crime and incidents earlier this year, we designated all hate crime as an organisational priority in May, and we've recently refreshed work on our hate crime control strategy, which is effectively the police's operational plan for how we intend to address the issue. This control strategy is designed to ensure that our response to hate crime is victim and community focused, two key priorities for our new Chief Constable. And in particular, we want to encourage more victims of racist crimes to report them to us. Where they do report crime to us, any crime, but in particular hate crime, police will continue to provide an enhanced level of investigation and supervision of the investigations that then take place. And we'll also be focusing on improving the outcomes of our hate crime investigations. In terms of outcomes for all hate crime, but in particular for race hate crime, there are challenges to achieving the outcomes, in particular through the criminal justice system. The vast majority of hate crime incidents in Northern Ireland involve damage to property and take place in circumstances where there are limited evidential opportunities or witnesses who are willing to give evidence. Through our revised control strategy, however, we're determined to do more, working with communities to bring those responsible for hate crime to justice. This will include calling on everyone in the areas affected by hate crime to stand up to the racist thugs by providing information either directly to the police or through the independent charity Crime Stoppers. However, even if we had twice the number of police officers, we wouldn't be able to arrest our way out of this problem. As we've heard today, racism is a deep-seated, long-running and a societal issue which needs to have a whole societal approach and response. I don't believe that this is reflective of who we are as a society here, and I think there is an onus on us all to help work not only to prevent hate crime, but to support those who fall victim to it and to support our communities. I want to thank the public as well up until this point for the help that they've provided to the police, in particular in terms of identifying those that were involved in the disorder that we saw at the start of August. You'll be aware as well that this week police officers removed racist posters that had been erected in the Rathcoole housing estate. I want to be very clear that this material should have been removed much sooner. I've heard firsthand from the Muslim community that the inertia of public authorities around hate displays gives rise to a concern that we are at best complacent about this sentiment, or at the very worst somehow supportive of it. So there's a real need for us all to redouble our efforts to demonstrate that there is no tolerance for this behaviour whatsoever. Rather than argue about what went wrong in Rathcoole, we're determined instead to focus on working with our partners and to urgently meet them so as we can all be clear on our shared responsibility to tackle racism in all of its forms. We are engaged with the Department for Infrastructure, and we expect to meet with them in the near future to discuss how we can collectively provide the most effective and timely response going forward. There are, of course, significant resource and challenges facing the police service. We talked earlier this afternoon about the programme for government. Just to give members a flavour, my area of local policing alone is estimated to be somewhere in the region of about 900 police officers short. It is against that backdrop nothing less than remarkable that Northern Ireland continues to be the second safest place to live, work and raise a family in the United Kingdom. It's a remarkable testament to the efforts of our officers, against the backdrop of diminishing resources, increased complexity of crime. To be achieving what we are is, as I say, nothing short of remarkable. But it is the equivalent of running an engine with no oil in it. It is a self-damaging exercise. It is metal on metal, and the cost and the toll that is being borne, in particular by our officers, is not acceptable. And I would reiterate the Chief Constable's call for the commitment that is in the draft programme for government, specifically around restoring the police officer numbers in the police service to 7,500. And I would use this opportunity again just to highlight the members of the committee just how important that is. We are on record, as I've said, of making the point that we do not have the resources to fill our statutory obligations to the level that we would like to. And that also underlines the need for all other partners to make sure that they play their role in dealing with issues and that they don't leave gaps with an expectation that the police will fill them. Resources, however, cannot be an excuse for us not fulfilling statutory obligations to victims of hate crime and protecting minority communities, and I want to reassure them that that won't be the case. It is, as I've said, a priority for us to respond to race hate crime. There is no higher priority for the police service, but there is a reality that less police will inevitably mean less policing and a lower standard of service overall for the entire community. In conclusion, Chair, racially motivated hate crime is abhorrent and it is a growing issue in communities across Northern Ireland. If we're going to effectively challenge and defeat racism, informed public debate such as this is crucial, so I'm grateful for the opportunity to put on record how we have responded to recent racist violence and to highlight the work that we're doing to support our minority communities. I'd be happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you, and I appreciate you both coming before committee today. You don't have to, you're not responsible to us, you're responsible to the policing board, so we're delighted you're here because obviously we had an evidence session a few weeks ago and there were some issues in relation to policing operation response, and I think the questioning today will hopefully reflect us raising those issues with you. So in that respect, I want to pick up on one of the allegations or one of the complaints from one of the members of that panel in terms of people whose houses have been attacked or they've faced intimidation in the community, and it's been suggested to them by the police, local police, to go and speak to local community representatives. And I had a very similar incident in the summer when a family's home was attacked twice, and on the second occasion it involved fire, and they were told, we're waiting to find out from a representative from a local community organisation whether you're safe in your home. I think that's absolutely unacceptable. And I just want to know how you are going to protect people and let them have confidence in you that that you're not doffing your cap to these so-called community workers in terms of your response to racist attacks. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you for the question. And I mean, having seen some of the evidence from the previous meeting of the committee, I think it was more pointed than that. Again, wasn't it? I think the specific claim was around police encouraging people to engage with paramilitaries.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I'm talking community workers by day, thugs, paramilitaries by night. Yes.
Okay. Well, look, I would just want to make clear that it's not the policy or the practice, nor should it ever be, for the Police Service of Northern Ireland to encourage people to go and engage with paramilitaries. There's no role for paramilitaries within our society. Community representatives may be a different matter. I'm aware of instances where we would encourage people to engage with local community representatives, those that work for properly accredited and funded initiatives. So I would draw that distinction. You have raised a specific case with me.
I don't necessarily want to go into details, but I suppose if you work that backwards, how can a community worker give a reassurance that the paramilitaries aren't going to attack a house at night? It's just that linkage there, that inextricable link between a community worker and whether or not a paramilitary organisation is going to organise for a house to be attacked or somebody's going to get beaten up on their way home from work.
Yeah, so I think that's a legitimate question, and I'm happy in the specific instance that you've mentioned to go away and just make some further inquiries to establish the kind of circumstances surrounding that.
Let me just put this on in front of you. I've worked in South Belfast for 27 years.
Yeah.
I could talk till midnight about similar instances. So I'm just saying about something happening in the summer. I'm saying this has been going on for years.
Yeah.
And it is really unacceptable, because what you do is you give an affirmation that they have an important role in society when they should have gone away a long time ago.
Yeah, so I mean, again, I'll be clear in terms of our engagement is with recognised community groups that are properly constituted, accredited and funded across the executive. I agree, and I'll reiterate my previous point, there is no legitimate role for paramilitaries to be playing in today's society. I mean, my policing history is probably well known to people in this room. I've spent much of my career in both the Terrorism Investigation Unit and the Paramilitary Crime Task Force. I've done my bit, I like to think, in terms of moving people from the stage, using all the tools at our disposals in terms of the criminal justice system. So I'm not an apologist in any way, shape or form for paramilitaries, let me just say that. We would, in terms of how we respond to threats to life or threats to property, we have well established and governed procedures in place. And not to go into the specific case that you've raised with me today, but I would expect to see that handled in line with the service procedure around that. So the police will respond to keeping people safe within communities. There isn't a role for other bodies or groups to do that. We will fulfil our responsibilities first and foremost. But in terms of trying to help people who are in particular, very difficult and challenging circumstances, again, if there is legitimate community outreach that can take place in order to make them feel safe and secure in their homes, then we would, of course, encourage that.
Thank you. Just a quick one then, and then I'll move on. And again, it was frustration from some of the representatives of that panel that they felt that the police stood by while businesses were attacked. And you talked there about the spontaneous attacks on those businesses a couple of nights later. But what about the spontaneous attacks as that group of so-called protesters made their way from the city centre up to Belfast Islamic Centre? I'm talking about Botanic Avenue. Yeah. Given the magnitude of that crowd, could it not have been foreseen that and the whipped up tension, could it not have been foreseen that there were businesses along that route that they could have targeted, and they did?
So I would say, first of all, totally understand the frustration that was expressed in this room previously, and as I've said myself this afternoon, the police commanders are frustrated that they weren't able to achieve what would have been their ideal outcome, which is no damage to property and nobody being injured, not only on Saturday the 3rd, but over the course of the next 7 nights. So we share that frustration, and we do reflect to see if there are, in particular, things that we could have done differently. I think it's just worth remembering that as we came into that weekend, we had a less than clear picture around what was going to happen on the Saturday. There was certainly social media traffic suggesting that there was a call in terms of bringing people to City Hall, but it wasn't by no means clear as to what the uptake of that would be, just how mobilising the misinformation that we've talked about would prove to be. So the police had resourced for what was going to happen on that Saturday in what I would describe as a reasonable worst case scenario, but even at that, I think the numbers that we saw present exceeded what we would have expected. We still had a sufficient amount of resource to be able to deal with what happened on the day, but the limiting factor was that we really only knew one other venue that was in the minds of those that had gathered, and that was the Belfast Islamic Centre. So the priority for the police commanders was making sure that parade did not reach the Belfast Islamic Centre. They took the decision to put a block in to stop the parade from progressing any further as they grew increasingly concerned about what their intentions might have been. And one of the great things about Belfast, and South Belfast in particular, is just how rich a community it is and how diverse it is. Unfortunately, in those circumstances, it meant that when the parade began to break up and move in different directions away from the block into side streets, there were no shortage of premises that they could have attacked, and we did see some opportunist action then. Some shops were damaged, and of course some of the hotels then were targeted as well. And we know that a group also broke away and made its way down through the Holy Lands and ended up in what could have been a really serious confrontation then down at the Ormer Road, close to the site of the bookmakers' atrocity. So it was I would describe it as being amongst the most challenging of policing operations that we've faced in quite some time. It was a particularly challenging one for the commanders on the day, and as I say, they're left frustrated that they couldn't do more to prevent what happened on that day. And in the subsequent evenings, yes, again, I understand the concern that exists around police tactics. Again, I think commanders have some reflection on that themselves about how they think it could be done better. And let's now engage in that debrief process. As I've said, we're really keen to have the community voice in that. So we have the evidence that was here before the committee, but we also have a planned engagement event on the 5th of November where we hope to hear more of that and again feed that back into our debrief process to see whether there was in fact something more that could have been done. And as I've said, we're always up for looking at our practices and trying to find a better way of moving forward and learning lessons where we can.
Okay, thank you. Deputy Chair, thank you.
Yeah, thank you both. Bobby and Paddy for coming in today. It is really appreciated, and thanks for waiting to the New Year and last today. So appreciate you sitting through the rest of our meeting. I wanted to ask, Bobby, you'd mentioned about the posters you'd removed that were in Newton Abbey, and can you correct me if I'm wrong? It was my understanding you'd said that you don't believe it was your job to remove them, and you'd previously said it was a job of the Department for Infrastructure.
Yeah.
Can you tell me then why you took the decision to remove them? How long they've been up for, and do you have any what working relationship do you have with the Department for Infrastructure to remove offensive materials from street furniture?
So the decision ultimately to remove them was because they'd been up for far too long in the first place, and we understand and appreciate the impact that it was having on the community. Yes, strictly speaking, in terms of the statutory responsibilities, we would say that it is the responsibility of the Department for Infrastructure to manage what's on the likes of lampposts. Our statutory responsibilities, naturally enough, are more related to the investigation of crime. Sometimes in the course of an investigation of crime, we will seize material in order to use it as evidence. However, that's not always required. The other thing that's required of us as a result of our statutory obligations, as well as investigating the matter, is to take some form of action in order to address the kind of ongoing harm that's associated with it. But we're left with sufficient discretion in that one of the things that we can ask is for other partners to assist us in the removal of that material. And in the case of Rathcoole, we had the posters not only on lampposts but also on some housing executive property as well. So shortly after they were first observed, which was around the 4th or 5th of August, we contacted both DFI and the housing executive. The housing executive were able to move quickly and have the poster on their property removed. I think it's now well documented. We got into some difficulties with the Department for Infrastructure around agreed rules and responsibilities. If we had known at the start of this process that it would run to this length of time, we would have acted sooner. And in actual fact, we have removed similar posters in the same area earlier in the year. But look, I'm not focused now in terms of the whys and wherefores around that. As I say, my focus is on how we work together going forward. So there's been correspondence between the PSNI and the Department for Infrastructure this week, and I understand that there's a willingness from both the Minister and the Department to sit down with us and other partners to kind of look at this in the round and ensure that as a collective we're providing the most effective and timely response that we can to these issues.
Thank you, and I understand that this isn't just an issue when it comes to these posters or other things attached to lampposts in Northern Ireland, which cause a great deal of frustration in communities as well. But how do you think it makes those communities feel who are targets of these posters, that it looks like for a month you've got a tug of war or passing the buck between you and DFI just to take a poster down? And do you think they're going to have confidence that you can deal with those mobs marching to attack their businesses, their homes and the Islamic Centre, attacking houses, intimidating people, healthcare workers out of their homes and smashing up local businesses in our town centre? If statutory agencies and the PSNI can't work together to get a poster removed from a lamppost?
So I don't have to think about how I know how they feel because I've had the conversation with them. I actually had a number of people contact me thanking the police service for removing the posters, and I responded to them and told them, you don't have to thank me, this should have happened weeks earlier. So I know exactly how they feel. It does lead to a run in confidence, not just in the police service, can I say, but the authorities in general. As I've remarked at the start of the hearing, we also recognise the significance of this. So I talked about that hate crime control strategy and a revised process amongst partners, but also a strategy and policy from PSNI is a key element of the control strategy. Because we recognise that it's absolutely fundamental to the community's confidence and supporting us, and then working from that, their ability to come forward and report any form of crime to us, but in particular hate crime.
That sounds quite promising. It might mean that I won't have to bring forward my private member's bill, so I will await interest in the development in that space. Go ahead, Carol.
So you've covered a lot of the issues in terms of that Saturday, and regrettably 20 of your officers are hurt and there's 49 arrests, and I'm sure there's a lot of young people who are going to end up going through the criminal justice system, and I'm sure it won't be the end. But see, in terms of even just speaking to Deirdre Hargey and some of the residents afterwards, if those residents hadn't been there, it could have been really, really bad.
Yeah.
And it's just to try and ensure, I mean, it was an unnotified parade, so they've broken different bits of legislation. So, I mean, there was a gathering at the City Hall,
Yep.
and then they decided to walk up. So, is that being pursued that way? And then the other thing is, was everyone who was arrested and charged all from the north? Was there any from the south? Because there was quite a lot of fascists up from
Yeah.
Dublin.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that talks to what I was saying earlier, just around the difficulty in terms of assessing what we were actually going to see in the day. And I think it came as a shock to everybody to see some of the allegiances which emerged on the day. I mean, we talked again about what happened on the Orma Road, and again, some of what people were gesturing down there suggested a kind of deep-seated knowledge and understanding around some of the sensitivities down there. And I agree, had it not been for the community coming out, things could have been, and the restraint that was displayed, things could have been much worse. I think I'm right in saying to date there hasn't been an arrest of anyone from the south, but the investigation still continues. I can absolutely assure you that the unnotified procession is the subject of investigation, and that's being looked at actively. You also touched on young people. Yeah, really disheartening to see a figure of now 9 young people arrested. The youngest, I think, again, well documented, an 11-year-old from South Belfast, charged to court, attended court on a day when he should have been, I think it was literally his first day of big school, as we would call it. So, yeah, really, really disappointing to see that, and again, just reinforces the need for that whole societal approach, working through the likes of education and other departments as well. So yeah, in terms of the kind of north-south element of this as well, that's something, and we just met last Friday actually again with the guards to discuss our cross-border strategy and a refresh of that. And in that meeting, we've agreed to incorporate hate crime as well as a north-south objective in terms of cross-border policing. So I think that's a welcome development, but also a sad reflection in terms of where we are on the island.
Yeah, it's just that I don't think anybody could have foreseen the alliances with some loyalists there and then fascists up from Dublin.
Yeah.
I mean, as far as I'm concerned, they're all fascists, but they're right to protest. What they don't have a right to do is what they did on that Saturday and afterwards. So, I mean, it was just to see if there was going to be an all-in cooperation, because I don't think this is going to be the end of it.
No.
You know, just in terms of people feeling that, you know, it's okay to come up and break the law and do whatever they want. So, no, that's fine. And then the last thing is, some of the people who appeared here, their confidence in the PSNI's response, just in general, is very low.
Yeah.
And I know you mentioned there's an engagement during the 5th to the 11th. Is that an engagement event with the community or with statutory bodies or both?
So it's with the community. Maybe ask Paddy just to speak to that.
Yeah, Paddy.
Yeah, so I mean, we've been doing this for quite some time, these engagement events with various different communities, but particularly with the ethnic minority communities. We've hosted, I think, now up to, I think it's 5 or 6 events over the course of the last sort of year and a half, and the next one will be on the 5th of November. It'll be some of the people that were in this room actually will be at that event as well. In fact, I'd be surprised if it's not all of them, along with a host of others from all over Northern Ireland. And the idea being will be for us to get from them, what are their concerns, try and understand the nature of that, feed that back into our debriefing process that the boss has talked about already, and really rebuild that trust and continue to build that trust, which is, I mean, it's a piece of work that we've been working on for almost 3 years now, following some of the incidents during COVID. Yeah. So yeah, it's an ongoing piece of work. It hasn't started just as a result of this. This is just the continuation of that work. But we recognise that there's some challenges that we need to face around all of that.
Yeah, I mean, their confidence was low in yourselves, and then I think the next group that they felt had let them down was the housing executive. So, but if you have seen it, you'll have picked that up yourselves.
I think it's also important to highlight that the group that was here, that engagement with them has been ongoing throughout this period as well. So that we do have strong relationships with in this case the ethnic minority communities across the board, and And you know, it's important that we're listening to their voice and they have a mechanism to influence, hold us to account, and make sure that we're procedurally fair around what we're trying to achieve. You know.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Brian was next, but he's left. Emma.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks to you both. I suppose what I want to ask about, it sort of ties in with what Carol was talking there about, what the Chair had mentioned at the start of her contribution. The group, when they came to present to the committee, referred to institutionalised racism within a number of statutory agencies. This specified the Housing Executive, but then sort of broadened that yourselves as an organisation would have that experience dealing with yourselves as well, and a lack of a trauma-informed response, and the language that can be used, and an awful lot of the time situations that are already very, very fraught can be exacerbated by people coming in from positions of authority and not, I suppose, treating people with compassion. And I suppose when you look across the world, obviously that goes right through authority and, you know, police forces across the world, and has done for generations. And I had my first experience just last week of what Paula was referring to in my own constituency, where someone was attacked in the estate that they live in, that they're from. And when speaking with local police, they referred to a community leader as if this person was an elected rep, as if they would need to be somebody that would need to be spoken to. And I got off the phone and I was like, oh my God, like I hear about these things happening in South Belfast. And when I hear you speaking, I'm like, oh my God, I'm so lucky that I live in South Derry. These things never affect us. But I couldn't believe the normalcy that was given to this individual, and the way that they were treated as if, yeah, they're someone that you would consult with and you would speak to about these matters. And I just have a concern because, you know, we are 26 years post Good Friday Agreement. But if we don't challenge this and we don't call it out and we don't say, hold on a wee minute, these people are continuing the legacy of fear in communities. This is a cycle, and these people are responsible for it. We're never going to eradicate it. And I appreciate, obviously, you guys are here to present to us today, and you know, this is obviously not the agreed position of the PSNI, but it appears that this is the reality on the ground, and I wonder what steps you can take to deal with that, because otherwise we're walking into another 25 years of this.
Yeah, I'd acknowledge, I mean, it is definitely a challenging context operating as a police service in a post-conflict society. In terms of the answer, I mean, I think the answer has been the likes of the Tackling Paramilitarism programme, which has been run for a number of years. Obviously, question marks now around what that looks like moving forward, whether it continues to retain the focus that it has done over the previous period, or maybe does it evolve to look more broadly at a health-led approach and violence reduction. Questions for people in this room to try and resolve. I mean, to respond to the first bit of your question, Emma, as well. So about whether I think you were asking whether we think we're structurally or institutionally racist. Was it as direct a question as that? Well, let me take that on. I mean, I would say that I don't believe that we are. I think that as a consequence of the history of police reform in Northern Ireland, I think equality, respect is hardwired into the PSNI, and it's written through the DNA of the organisation. I would, however, recognise there is a need for continual education and cultural awareness around officers to make sure that they're sensitive to the needs, in particular, of changing communities. That's why the engagement that Paddy's talked about is so critical as well, in terms of making sure that for an organisation that at this point isn't as representative as it could be of black and minority ethnic communities, that nonetheless their voice is heard and understood within the organisation. So we're absolutely committed to doing that. We're really hopeful that we might have a further new police recruitment campaign next year, and we will be specifically targeting black and ethnic minority communities for recruitment to the police service. So as we can, again, on top of the DNA that we already have around this, that we can benefit from the kind of cultural diversity that exists within our communities and protect ourselves from the risk of any form or manifestation of institutional or other racism within the organisation. So that's my view. I know other people will have views on that, and I respect their opinions on that as well. I return to the point just around moving things on in our society. I'll make the point again. There's no reason for paramilitary groups to still exist. Those that do should have long left the stage. In my experience, those that remain are in it for either coercive control of communities, whether that's about power, but more often than not it's about money. And that's why, in particular, through the work that we've done with the National Crime Agency and HMRC, we've sought to go after the money and the people that are so wedded to it.
Sure, if I could just... No, I appreciate your response, but I suppose it just sort of... What you're saying there, I think, gets to the nub of it. Like, these groupings, regardless of how they label themselves, are criminal gangs. And I do have a fear that we almost legitimise them, you know, by giving them some sort of a political inference, when really that's not what they have. Yeah. But the point around institutionalised racism, like, all of these people that are anti-immigrant and use even the term illegal immigrant, as if a human being can be illegal. It's offensive. But they all, and that's why those fascists that came up from Dublin and were standing then with loyalists were then mortified then when they went down the road again, because it's the exact same. It's hatred, it's discrimination, it's an ideology that hates others without even understanding anything about their lives. And unless we reject that wholeheartedly, we're going to be left with that problem. But I sometimes fear that the way that we're dealing with these paramilitaries, giving them legitimacy and funding them, I mean, there are these dissident Republican groups who are the same thing, and sometimes I feel that, you know, speaking to police and different people locally, they think that they are in some way connected to my organisation, which they are not. They hate me as much as they hate the loyalists that they're supposed to be opposed to. And I fear sometimes that, some of these initiatives, all they're really doing is keeping that going so that we can, you know, pretend that there's still this big division within society, that two groups hate each other, when really most of us are getting along really well and all want to work together. And there's just these side factions that continue to have this for their own benefit. And when we're continuing to deal with them and act as if they're normal players in society and they have a right to make decisions for communities, then we're just tolerating it and allowing it to go on indefinitely. And that's what. Sorry, I'm digressing.
But it's a really valid point. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, I mean, just to say, I mean, so I know the Independent Reporting Commission have previously commented on group transition and things like that. I'm sure they'll continue to report as part of the Tackling Paramilitarism programme, and we want to do everything we can to support them and the wider programme to be successful, to kind of free communities of this kind of continuing legacy of what happened here. So yeah, I mean, I don't disagree with you in terms of how we guard against not legitimising individuals and groups. To an extent, it comes back to how we approach our engagement, because we don't afford access or influence to anybody that we wouldn't give to anybody else. And in particular with the black and minority ethnic community, in particular newcomers to this society, because those established existing relationships haven't existed, we have had to proactively pursue those. That's absolutely right that we do that, and we've challenged ourselves the whole way along the last 3 years of the journey to make sure that we're doing that as much as possible. And yes, the sentiment that was expressed here in the committee didn't come as a surprise to us, because we have those regular conversations. But again, to put it in context, whilst there's still confidence issues there, I would hope that those same groups would acknowledge that the kind of goodwill and the commitment demonstrated by the police over the last 3 years should be evidence that we're serious about the relationship and improving the service that we provide them as a community as a whole.
Okay, thank you. Harry, please.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, Paddy and Bobby. Appreciate it. I do know prior to the summer of 24 you have been doing sterling work, and thank you for that. But I just would ask, what steps are you now taking after the summer of 24 that would be different than what you would have been doing?
So I'd mentioned that we'd already identified hate crime as being a priority. We were already working on the revised control strategy, but again, the events of the summer have certainly sharpened our focus around making sure that refreshed control strategy is really meaningful. So I've talked about taking on the really difficult issues that have proved really difficult for us as a society in terms of hate displays. I know there were some mentions throughout the course of the evidence today to the FICT report, which, by my reckoning was published in December 2021, but I think we're yet to see any real clarity in terms of what's coming next on that. Technically, we still have a flags protocol, which was published by the Office of the First and Deputy First Ministers in 2005, could you believe? And it's been under review since 2008. So there is a gap and a space around that, but in that gap and space, as we've talked about with Connie, that is eroding trust and confidence in policing specifically for that community. So if we're serious about tackling hate crime, we recognise that we need to have a far more effective policing, but also collective response to that. There are other related issues that we know significantly impact the community's ability to trust the police. One of those that we've heard an awful lot about is is persons that have insecure immigration status, in particular victims and witnesses who'd be reluctant to come forward because they're worried about what the police's role would be in terms of working with the Home Office and enforcement. So again, we've identified that as another key strand of work. None of this stuff easy, can I say, but really, really important in terms of demonstrating a commitment to addressing the issues that matter to the community and to give them confidence. The other thing that I'm really keen to try and push on is around trying to assist, and I talked about this, in particular the neighbours, the other people that live within communities that know that the activity is not representative or reflective of their area. It's about trying to empower them, recognising that sometimes there are, legitimate concerns from them around their safety if they come forward and provide information to the police if they go into the criminal justice system. So I think there is a huge role to play, in particular for the likes of the independent charity Crime Stoppers, to give the police, at the very least, the intelligence, the information that we need to be able to take action against those that are responsible. And I should take this opportunity just to say that when the posters were removed in Rathcoole, it wasn't just the black and ethnic minority community who were really pleased about that, it was also the local community, because it is not reflective of what people in that particular area want to see.
Yep. And you made a good comment in your earlier introduction, less police, less policing. So, I mean, we're all fighting for more police right in your corner. So, appreciate it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Claire, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you. I don't underestimate the challenges that you police officers have. I don't feel that you're fully supported in terms of resource, whether that's finance. I think even in terms of the numbers of policing, not just the recruitment, but actually the officers who are capable of working in terms of mental health and sickness. And I think that's a big conversation that we really need to look at, because we can increase our numbers to 7,500. But if half of those are often sick, it still has the same effect as having less. Probably a conversation for another committee. I agree with other comments that I nearly feel the racist attacks are another iteration of course of control. And whether in previous instances it's drugs, and 100% do we legitimise people by calling them paramilitaries when really we should give them their proper name, and it's criminals. The tackling paramilitarism, I'm obviously very familiar with it, and I always felt it was never going to be successful in the absence of a programme for government. We need to build communities up so that they're not easily manipulated by these people, and they're not providing them with, I suppose, a better life that the government is not doing. So that's kind of my thoughts in and around it. I suppose just to kind of come back to my initial point around being supported. Do you feel as a police force you are supported in ultimately policy and legislation to take forward the things that you want to take? Like, I think you've been very candid in saying that posters should be removed, that you should be addressing certain things, but realistically you can only do what the legislation allows you to do. And certainly hate crime legislation is limited. But I suppose I want to draw your attention to criminal legislation that does exist. So incitement to hatred legislation under the Public Order Northern Ireland 1987, which does put a statutory duty on, I think, even the likes of the department to remove that. And how do you as a police force interpret that, given that's the only statutory instrument that we potentially have to do what you would like to do?
Yes. So yeah, there's a few. So yeah, can I say I agree with you? Sadly, housing intimidation is nothing new to us in this society, is it? And that's been a big driver for what's happened here. That's why, obviously there were events nearly 12 months ago in the Middle East that drove some of the kind of racial tensions. But really, from the turn of the year, it's been primarily about housing issues. In terms, again, just to pick up on your point around the number of officers that aren't available. So this is the reality. When I'm using that analogy of an engine with no oil in it and it being metal on metal, it is wearing itself down. So because there aren't enough officers, more and more officers are becoming sick or becoming not available for work. And I think we're way past even the critical point in this. And I would take the opportunity again just to appeal to people that I think we really do need to be a key plank of the programme for government. In terms of legislation, I think it's fair to say we could be better served in this space in terms of dealing with, in particular, hate expression. And you've asked specifically about the interpretation of the public order. I mean, I've set out, it's our view that our statutory responsibility is around investigation. It comes with it, linked to the public order and other legislation, with a responsibility for us to take some action. But it can't be the case, surely, that the police are now going to be policing what goes up on buildings, lampposts, and other infrastructure. And I've made the point before, we don't have enough police to do what are our statutory functions. We heard Ricky Irwin as well talking about the racial equality strategy and it being cross-cutting and everybody having a part to play in it. And again, I think across the executive, a refreshed racial equality strategy that again sought to grip some of these really difficult issues, I think would be really helpful to the police service going forward.
Thinking out loud, given that legislation exists and it does put a statutory duty on public bodies, police, potentially DFI as well, how do we challenge that? If we took it through the courts, because the DFI, it's their furniture, they're not willing to take it down for reasons I do understand, to be fair, but it exists, so we could get new legislation and it not be implemented either.
Yes.
So and I know this is a wider conversation, and I'm the last person to say, you're the people who pick up the pieces, but you are, So how do we address this? Do we need just new legislation because we're too far gone?
Well. Possibly, maybe we need a private member's bill. I don't know. I'm sure some might say.
Okay.
But look, we can't wait for new legislation either. We have to use what's at our disposal. Look, I think, the DFI have removed material first before. It's a matter now really of us getting in the room and understanding what went wrong in this specific instance. Okay. And I hope that working even within the existing framework, we can come up with a better way of collectively doing our business. I think the will is there to do that.
Okay. It's good to know that they have removed material in my issue in Korean, but anyway.
Okay, thank you. And thank you for coming today. And I would ask that you would convey to the 20 officers who were injured over the summer the best wishes of this committee. We really appreciate those guys who were on the front line in the summer. They averted a lot more damage. So thank you. Thank you for coming. Really appreciate that.
Thanks for those comments.
I am wondering if the clerk might keep me right here. See the Independent Reporting Commission, given some of the issues that we've raised today and the impact in terms of good relations. I know they're another independent body, but I wonder, could we invite them to a meeting?
They still exist. They formally reconstituted again.
I met with them.
I think it's still going.
Not too long
Some of them
ago.
retired.
No, it was supposed to be finished, but I think it's still going.
We're extended? Were they?
Extended? Okay.
Must have been.
But is it the same people on it?
Still at least 3 of them.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, it's more just to get that measure of where the structures, the structures. But anyway, we'll move on very, very quickly. So item 9, there's our inquiry into gaps in equality legislation, and I want to seek your agreement to publish the responses that the committee has received to the consultation, but subject to confidentiality inquiries requirements. The other issue that the clerk and the deputy chair and I were thinking about today was the question that you raised the issue you raised last week, Carol, around the different groups like disability, LGBT, women. And I'm just wondering, would it be, and young people, would it be a useful exercise to maybe have like a round table meeting upstairs?
So I was going to raise that because even in the correspondence from the Children's Commissioner, he said it would be better to engage with young people. So I remember we've done it before with committees. I do think it's a matter of getting them together. Because it's a first and quickest way of dealing with it.
So if I'm okay then to ask the clerk and his team then to look at the mechanisms, and we could all maybe just, host a table and we could work through that. So hopefully sooner rather than later, but we need to make sure we can get as much. So I think you've put some options down there, clerk, but for the interest of time, we'll move on. So forward work programme then. So seek your agreement to invite CIJ and Amnesty International to discuss conflict legacy off the back of the ICRIR a few weeks ago.
ICRIR,
yes.
Yeah.
So is that okay? We can invite them. They had asked, and if you're happy and content that we proceed with the forward work programme is in your pack. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
Although, Chair, the Human Rights Commission's still down.
Oh yes.
Do you remember we're going to try and take them out?
As an add to their...
Added this, another one?
Yeah, because we'd originally invited them to come to talk about the right to access to data.
Yeah.
Yes.
And that's why we put them together with Crowley for that session.
But
if
Carol
there's something else you want them to come for.
Suggested.
Yeah, but we're also talking about, so they came with the Equality Commission that day. I think we should use it as an opportunity to talk about gaps in quality screening and that. Yeah. So it gives them an opportunity.
More of a wide, broad brush.
Absolutely.
Okay, and so the clerk will also email out to see about the committee meeting in Derry on the 16th of October, whether people needed a bus and stuff, so we can go back to that. Does anybody want to raise any issues under correspondence?
Can I just check something, Chair? It was mentioned about us inviting mayors. I know we talked about it in the previous meeting, but it wasn't an agreed action of the committee.
Yes, sorry.
Is that something that the committee wants to agree to?
Migrant support, is it?
Yeah. We invited migrant help before, and they didn't come. They didn't want to come.
I think I would just remind them again. Yeah.
Okay.
If you don't mind, Michael. But
mayors and migrant help.
Okay.
Is it worth inviting, after the point in which they've got leave to remain? Because I think that's where a lot of the issues are.
So that's what the group said. I mean, the issues are getting even access. I mean, if you get your status, leave to remain status, you've literally hours to get out of the accommodation.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay.
So it's causing problems.
Housing, well, I don't know. Housing executive might be.
Well, maybe just have a session on that.
Yeah.
We'll leave it up to them to invite people. Okay. Any other business? Anyone? No. Okay. Thanks everybody. It was a long session. Thank you.
Committee Room 30, sound.